Yeah.
So I'll turn it over to Daisy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. Daisy Korea, everybody. I know you know me. We've been working together in the task force and also previously on other projects. So just the mission and purpose of today's meeting is obviously to make homelessness in Pinellas very brief and one-time experience. The purpose of the task force is to really address the new legislation that's coming October 1. Start looking at ways that we can successfully bridge those gaps and provide services and also make a really good entry or access point to our clients that are needing assistance so that we can direct them better, and also look at other options as far as shelter, rapid rehousing services, housing services, and also work with our community partners so that we can get a really good entry process for our clients so that they don't end up having to go to jail or having to do things that they necessarily do not want to be placed in. So that's the purpose of this meeting. Also looking at the costs of how much it would be to initiate some projects, maybe extending some length of time with some clients in the shelter. So we're just kind of exploring thinking outside of the box and also looking at innovative ways to assist our clients, with this new law that's coming up. So this is just a quick view of the agenda. You also have a copy. We'll do a really quick emotional compass just to kind of get everybody on the same page. I know we're all excited to be here and really work on this together as a task force. As Kathleen mentioned too, we are going to have a quick session of the law review if anybody has questions on it. I'm waiting for our attorney that sits on our HLA board to come online to answer any questions that are needed. There is a lot of data review. I know that a lot of you were requested information that our team put together. There are some packets on the front desk if you didn't get one with a lot of that information as well. We'll have a mini break, or we'll kind of feel the room out if you want to take a break, a 5-minute break or not. We'll look at areas of action. We'll review everything that was notated on the last meeting on those big easel pads of what we were thinking about. Some discussion groups, look at an action worksheet to see who do we assign these projects to, how do we go about moving forward, and then we'll discuss next steps and hopefully be done by 4:25 or hopefully a little bit earlier. I don't want to keep you too long. Okay. So the next up will be Victoria Kelly with HLA, and she will be talking quickly about emotional compass.
Okay. So during the last meeting, if you were here, you got to watch that short little video about the emotional compass. But as a refresher, and for everybody who wasn't here, I want to talk about that a little bit. Let me start with, hi, I'm Victoria Kelly. I'm with the Homeless Leadership Alliance. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really happy to see everybody here today. Thank you for joining us and for being committed. So just to start off with, and you don't need to say this out loud, but think about how you feel when people discuss criminalizing homelessness. What is your gut reaction to that question? Daisy, can you do the next slide? Yes. Thank you. So with that in mind, there is, I did not invent this as much as I would like to take credit for it. Courageous Conversations has provided us with this awesome emotional compass. And the idea of this compass is that most of us fall into one of these quadrants. Sometimes with a lot of practice, we can maybe get into the center. But when you think about criminalizing homelessness, are you reacting, Daisy, can you go to the next slide, with your head? Are you in your thinking place? That means, oh, I started at the second one. You are responding to an issue or information, criminalizing homelessness. But you want more information. You are really here for the data, and you need that data to move forward and to really react. Are you coming to this with your heart? You really feel it. You have an emotional reaction, a gut reaction. I don't mind telling y'all, like I said in the last meeting, I start most days in the emotional quadrant. I try really hard to move towards the center, but I start in the emotional quadrant, just being honest. Are you coming to this today from a moral place? Do you react? Do you feel this deep in your soul? Which means that you are coming from a deep-seated belief. You know, you might hear, when I say, how do you feel about criminalizing homelessness? If your reaction is deep down in your gut, housing is a human right, you're probably coming to this from a moral standpoint. Or are you in that relational quadrant where you are reacting with your hands and your feet and you are ready to go like start a protest or go to City Hall or create some kind of action list? You know, that's the relational, that's the acting. So those are the 4 quadrants. And again, most people tend to be in one of those quadrants. The idea is with practice, we can move towards the center though, so that we can have a little bit more of a balanced reaction. We bring this up because it's important to know where you as an individual are coming from. And then it's also important to, once you have your own feelings and thought processes recognized, it's important to know where other people in the room are coming from as well. This is how we have meaningful conversations so that we are not talking at each other, we are collaborating. You know, if you are coming to this from an emotional standpoint, but I am talking to somebody who is in a thinking headspace, I am not going to win them over by tugging at their heartstrings. I am going to win that person over by presenting them with facts. And it's important for me to know that because that's how we have meaningful, engaging conversations and actually make progress. So with that in mind, is there anybody brave enough to raise their hand and tell us if they are with me in the emotional quadrant? No, I'm here by myself. I'm emotional, guys. That makes me feel lonely. Is anybody coming to this from an intellectual headspace? Thank you very much. All right. So we have a lot of data people here in this room. I'm working on just permanently being a little bit more towards that quadrant. All right, what about the soul? Is there anybody who has a really moral reaction here? All right, a couple of people who are feeling that as well. What about relational acting? Anybody who really wants to jump up and act? Thank you, Vero. Anybody else? All right. I'll tell you, I am living between the emotional and the relational here because I am ready to do something. So that's how I feel. Thank you all very, very much for sharing. Daisy, I think we can go on to the next one. The next one might be here. No, okay. So with all of that in mind, now that you know where you're coming from, now that you know where the other people in the room are coming from, we can really start off on an even playing field, or at least we can start off on a more even playing field. And that involves discussion guidelines. So during this meeting, we want to make sure that we stay engaged, okay? That means listening and participating. Listening means active listening. Please don't talk while other people are talking. 1, it will confuse people in the room maybe. 2, it will make the recording harder to hear, which is difficult for people who are not here and for me on the back end of this when I'm doing minutes. So please don't. Value everybody's perspectives. We are all coming to this from our own perspective. I am an expert in my thing. You are an expert in your thing. And though I might understand your thing, it isn't my thing. Your perspective and your experiences are yours. They are not mine. So speak from your own perspectives and experiences and allow other people to do the same. Believe that we are all coming to this from a good place. Nobody is here to, you know, burn down the house or anything like that. I don't think we are here to collaborate and try and come up with an equitable solution together. Know that this is not a debate on that note. It's an opportunity for collaboration. Allow everybody to speak, disagree respectfully, which means not placing blame. We might feel as though somebody could have stepped up a little bit more one time or something like that. This really is not the place for that. We are not airing grievances here. We are collaborating. So let's try really hard to focus on that spirit of collaboration and the general assumption that we are all here to do some good. Guidelines brought up during the last task force meeting. Respect the agenda. Let's go ahead and try and follow that as much as we can. And let's ensure everybody's voice is heard. So if there's somebody in the room who hasn't been participating, go ahead and encourage them. If they're open for it, wonderful. If somebody else is speaking again, try not to cut them off. Give them that opportunity. Are there any other guidelines that we should keep in mind for the further discussion? No?
I think the one thing from the last meeting that I went away with was, I think we should all try to mirror somebody else's situation or point of view. Just because you have a point of view, you're in one of your squadron. That emotional intelligence, emotional part, you have to understand that people come from a different experience, different facilities, and to place blame or push on one is not gonna help the whole cause of why we move forward.
Love it. I love that. I think that that's a really, really great suggestion. So really honor other people's experiences. I love that. And then on that note, that reminds me of something. Ross, you once suggested, instead of the golden rule, the platinum rule. Would you mind telling everybody what the platinum rule is?
Sure. So the golden rule is do unto others as you have done unto you. The platinum rule is do unto others as others want done unto them. So it requires trying to understand the other person and where they're coming from, where they want to go, and how you can help them get there.
I think let's try and embrace that today. Let's try and uphold the platinum rule today and then every day moving forward if we can. All right, that is all that I have for you. Is Erin with us now, Daisy?
No, I think it's like the data piece.
Okay, well, you know what? That's okay. I think Imani's excited to share some information with y'all since y'all are so excited to hear that data today.
I know it's a lot of data, a lot of information, so we'll try to get through it as much as we can. And if you have questions, I would prefer to kind of leave it towards the end and we can kind of come back to it so that we could just kind of get through it because it is a lot of information that going through that.
So thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. My name is Imani Smith. I'm the manager of HMIS and System Administration. Thank you so much for having me again to talk about some of our HMIS data. So in today's presentation, we're going to cover a lot, right? So we're going to talk about capacity, we're going to talk about utilization, and we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit more about coordinated imagery. Okay.
Can I just say something real quick? Sorry. So I know in the last meeting, we were talking about getting the true numbers on shelter and capacity. I know we did have a conversation as chairperson member Kathleen Beckman mentioned that we went to the sheriff's meeting that they had, and we did confirm at least verbally that the Safe Harbor was at 470. Right now, the capacity, the number would be 390, right? Yeah. So we did put those numbers on these slides to just look at the true capacity numbers. So you will see that difference from the previous meeting, from the first meeting that we had. So just wanted to give you that preference before Imani shared that information. Thank you. Next slide, please.
So I definitely wanted to stop and talk about a couple of definitions. I know during our last presentation, I felt like I was throwing a lot of terms around and things were getting a little mixed up. So these are our definitions. Of course, households without children, beds and units typically serving households with adults only or individuals, households with at least one adult and one child, bed and units typically serving households with at least one adult and one child, our family units, right? Or a relation, households with only children, so our youth programs. So beds and units typically serving households composed of persons under the age of 18. So here in our presentation, bed inventory. Oh, that's right. Bed inventory, that's going to be the total number of beds available for occupancy. And we're really going to be using that for our individual programs. Then we have unit inventory. So that's going to be total number of units available for occupancy. And we're really going to be focused on units when we're talking about family or multi-person households. Next, we jump to capacity. Of course, that's our maximum number of beds or units a program can handle. Occupancy, number of persons residing in those units or beds. And then last, but certainly not least, our utilization rate, which is that proportion of units or beds that are occupied on any given day. So now we're gonna jump right on into capacity, and please keep in mind that for this point in time, we're talking about our number for Monday, May 27th. Right, y'all, so this is our total shelter inventory by program type. So again, these numbers have been adjusted, as Daisy mentioned earlier. So our safe harbor count has been adjusted to 390. We also wanted to highlight CASA here as well. 92 units, and then the Haven was 25. Or beds, excuse me. So just for reference, right, we definitely wanted to put that shelter inventory by program type right after that last chart. So that way we can kind of see at a glance what all of our programs are looking like. And please keep in mind, right, so the ones that are in that unit capacity, those are gonna be our family or multi-person households. We're going to be, again, looking at units as opposed to beds. So. Sorry, money. Okay. All right, and this is just continued, right? Some more information on our safe haven programs and our transitional housing programs. So I can't remember who it was, I apologize, but last meeting, someone made a great point to check on our St. Vincent de Paul South low demand program. And after touching base with them, we did confirm that that is a transitional housing program and that has been updated accordingly.
Quick question.
Yes.
Remind me what a safe haven bed is, please?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so safe haven, and intensive services, right? That's going to be usually for mental health requirement. But very like 25 beds only. And so the reason why that low demand program didn't fit into that project type anymore is because that program has more than 25 beds at this time. Next slide. All right, y'all. So now we're gonna talk about shelter inventory for adults without minor children. Oh wait.
Oh, that's backwards. That was different because the bottom was different.
Okay, thank you. I was like, am I losing my mind? Okay, good for that. Thank you. Sorry. No, okay, I appreciate it. All right, so shelter inventory for adults without minor children. So these are gonna be our individual programs. So taking a look again, that safe harbor has been adjusted to 390. So that program, right, for a total adult without minor children, this is going to be that intake for here. And right, separating those units versus beds depending on that family type. So now we're going to talk about shelter inventory for adults without minor children, but this does not include our specialty programs. So what do I mean by specialty programs or requirements? That's going to include things like veterans, medical respite, specific to males or specific to females, things like that. Shelter inventory for our veterans. So again, right, we were able to update that low demand, so now it's in that transitional housing category. These are adequate for our veteran specific programs. So now we're going to jump into our inventory for survivors of domestic violence. So our two big programs or three big programs, right, come from CASA and the Haven. That includes emergency shelter and transitional housing. So next, we're going to jump into our specialty program. So again, that could be, you know, individuals, children only, medical respite. We did include Alpha House on here because, of course, their focus is expecting mothers, right? So we definitely wanted to include their numbers here as well. So inventory for adults with at least one minor child. Again, instead of looking at beds here, we are going to be focused on units. And the reason for that is I just wanna double back. The reason for that is because, of course, depending on the makeup size of that family household or multi-person household, it could affect the bed count, right? So if it's a family of four, they need, you know, possibly need 4 beds, family of five beds, etc. Not focusing on occupancy, again, right, we're gonna be focused on numbers from Monday to. So the utilization here is going to be looking at the count of clients for the shelter serving individuals and the count for the head of households, again, right, for our family units. For shelters that serve families, right, against the capacity for each shelter project. Please keep in mind though, that our baby programs are not included in this count. That's very important. And the reason for that is because at this time, the data that we have from the Haven and CASA, we really only have our capacity counts. We're working with CASA as far as data sharing to get that occupancy count. And this is just, again, at a glance, right? So looking at our individual shelters, looking at the client count, our bed capacity, right, our bed inventory, and then that utilization. So again, this is just continued as well, right? It's going to the different project types of safe haven and our transitional. Oh, and would you mind going back one more? For this as well, again, just want to reaffirm that due to HUD not recognizing cribs as beds, right? Alpha House is using the head of household count to remove that overutilization. And again, still at a glance, right? We're coming now into adults with at least one minor child. So multi-person household or family. And then, right, adults without minor children, shelter occupancy. Again, please keep in mind, we're not including our DV program here, and again, that safe harbor has been adjusted.
May I ask a question again? So if you go back one slide, if let's say we don't include cribs. Then for family shelter, that would be different altogether.
So we don't include cribs. Well, HUD, I think
Right.
there, HUD does not count the cribs as beds. So for Alpha House, our last presentation, it was showing an overutilization because of the cribs in the bed. But I wanted to be more true to that utilization count and show it as focusing on that head of household
Okay,
instead.
and I seem to recall, did we change that for this as well?
Oh, yeah.
Families,
Yes.
so that, okay, thank you. Got it.
Again, taking a look at our utilization here in regards to adults without minor children. Kind of at a glance again, right, all of our various programs. Now, adults without minor children, shelter occupancy. Again, right, these are not including, again, our specialty programs like our veteran, medical respite, et cetera. And keep in mind, again, that safe harbor number has been adjusted. Now focusing on our veterans programs. And our veteran occupancy. So again, we have our bed capacity there and our next door. Our specialty program. So again, as we mentioned, right, out the house count has been adjusted. All right, for those with minor children, talking about our shelter occupancy again, keep in mind, right, house or multi-person households, we are focused on that head of household count to calculate that utilization. I'll pass on the baton for coordinated entry. Thank you all for your time.
We have time on the agenda for some questions. So I know, I think we're still, did you get any comment from Aaron? I texted him. And
No, not yet.
responded. Okay, so our attorney, so we do have some time on the agenda, right? We have data review starting at 2:10 to 2:40. Well, and the other parts of it. So we have anybody have Q&A on all that data? These slides?
Oh, we still have to go through coordinated entry. We have a couple of slides on coordinated
that?
entry, and then we
Okay.
have some time at the end for questions.
Okay, great. Sorry about that.
Can everyone hear me when I speak?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Sorry about my mask, everyone. My name is Suzanne Boylan. I'm the Senior Manager of Coordinated Entry with the Homeless Leadership Alliance. Thank you for having me. So I'll be going over some updated information, updated coordinated entry data. As you all might know, but for those who do not know, every week I do pull the coordinated entry prioritization lists. And those lists are cleaned up every single week. And then I break it out into subpopulation and send it out to providers. So some of you may get those emails every single week with updated weekly prioritization lists. So I'll be going over the updated data based off of the CE data from Tuesday, because it was Memorial Day on Monday, so this is a little bit more updated than usual, right? All right, so clients currently awaiting permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. So families and individuals awaiting permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. That is what that means specifically. Some or oftentimes this doesn't, coordinated entry is not the end all be all, right? So should one be awaiting rapid rehousing or awaiting permanent supportive housing, it doesn't mean that that's what they want to do, right? But the numbers that I'm providing you today and that I, will be providing you from here on out during these meetings, think about it as these are clients awaiting referral or are working on self-resolving on their own, because not everyone needs or wants a housing intervention program. All right, so current prioritization list data as of the 20th of this week. So based on coordinated entry data, qualification for either rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing is based on one's acuity, right? And acuity is measured by the VI-SPDAT, which is the coordinated entry assessment that our COC is currently utilizing. Family numbers listed here are family units, not individual clients. And these counts do include veterans. So families on awaiting or on the wait list for housing intervention. For rapid rehousing, there are approximately 72 families that are scoring within that rapid rehousing range. And there are 5 families awaiting referral or placement enrollment into permanent supportive housing. Clients on the wait list for housing intervention for individuals. So there are approximately 570 individuals awaiting rapid rehousing, referral, or enrollment that are scored within that scoring intervention of rapid rehousing. And there are 187 permanent supportive individuals awaiting permanent supportive housing. So I added this slide in, right? So the prior slide did show a cumulative number. It did not separate out subpopulations. So what I wanted to do for our meeting today is really highlight how many of those counts that I previously went over represent the number of veterans among those counts. So veteran families on the wait list for housing intervention for rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is 1. And for permanent supportive housing, also 1.
You're welcome.
Ditto. I'm just kidding. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. So veterans on the wait list for housing intervention, individuals specifically. So 24 individuals are awaiting permanent supportive housing. And approximately 108 veteran individuals are awaiting rapid rehousing. However, with veterans, it's a little bit different, right? So a lot of, there are eligibility requirements for all rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing programs. For SSVF, that is the Supportive Services for Veterans and Families. That is the rapid rehousing program for veterans and, you know, our COC, and I'm sure obviously in other COCs as well. There are specific income requirements that we have to look at. Oftentimes, one may not be eligible because they have over income. So this number that we're seeing for those veterans awaiting referral to rapid rehousing, that actually may not be the plan, right? But this is the technical number of those that are scoring, of those veterans that are scoring within that rapid rehousing range.
So, and I also think that 108 is the fact that they remain on that list until we've housed them. So of the 108, how many do not have a housing intervention attached to them? Because I think that number is under 10.
The 108 is actually the veterans that are on the active list.
How
So
many
this
of
does
them?
not include,
So they were going to remain on that active list as long as they were in GBD or as long as that they are in SSVF but not housed.
SSVF. So anyone enrolled in SSVF will appear on the referred or enrolled tab that I send out with the prioritization list every week.
108 includes the GBD census.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. So they are not clients on the street. There are clients in rent per diem, that are not literally homeless, that are waiting an intervention for housing, or that they're working with a rent per diem program. So it's, not that we have 108 client veterans on the street. They're just waiting for another intervention besides rent per diem or shelter.
Thank you. So this might also help a little bit with that question. So I also added this slide that reflects the unsheltered household awaiting RRH and permanent supported housing. So, oh, sorry. Can you go back? Okay, so families. There are 46 unsheltered families that are on the active list, right? So this means that they have not been, you know, enrolled or referred to a rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing, any kind of housing intervention program. Yeah. Individuals, unsheltered individuals awaiting RRH or PSH housing intervention, 243. This does include veterans. So, Michael, I would be actually more than happy to, after I'm done, I can look into my computer just to tell you exactly how many veterans on the active list are unsheltered, if you'd like.
It's under 10.
So the current family shelter prioritization list as of yesterday. This list I run a lot more than I run the coordinated entry prioritization list. These numbers and these counts fluctuate significantly. 1 hour, it can be, you know, yesterday it was 73. An hour after I ran it, it could have been 89. Right, so I am more frequently running the shelter prioritization list. So as of yesterday, there are 73 families with minor children on the shelter prioritization list, self-reporting to be literally homeless and awaiting interim shelter placement. The chart below represents data on self-reported last permit addresses. I felt that this was important for us to highlight and show because it's a version of heat mapping, right? So we're looking at where are most of these literally homeless families that are on the shelter prioritization list, and where are they reporting to where are they reporting their last permanent address to be? So as you can see, the most amount of families on the shelter prioritization list are self-reporting their last permanent address to be in St. Petersburg, 36 to be exact. Clearwater are self-reporting their last permanent address, 11. Largo, 6. Outside of metro area, but within Florida, 5. Kansas City, 4. Outside of state of Florida, 4. Pinellas Park, 2. Littleman, 2. Seminole, Hillsborough County, and Pasco, 1.
Can you just clarify for me? So these numbers are the families that are on the list, the numbers that we referred out. Is that right? So if they are outside or staying in Hillsborough or Pasco, somewhere that's not in Pinellas County, why would they be on the list?
It's the last permanent. See, it says the last
I-
permanent here.
I got that. However, I also get that a lot of families, I mean, we have this conversation regularly, right? Families are not actually living in here. They're living in Manatee County. They're staying there in St. Petersburg because there are St. ARPA dollars available. So I guess I'm just wondering, how are we paring that down with, we have 73 families? Like, these are the numbers that I'm looking for this, the ones that are literally homeless. The coordinated, the ones that are in GPD or somewhere else are great, but the ones that are literally homeless, so are the ones that we're worried about right now with this task force meeting. So I'm just wondering, how are we, if we are paring this down somewhere at the HLA before we report that?
So the way that I see that narrative, if your bar graph is accurate, of the 73, 92% of them are from Pinellas County and living here. And we have to stop with the narrative that people are coming here to be homeless because we're better at solving it. 93% are either in Pinellas or from here.
They're reporting that when they call, but when we get to having the conversations, they're not here. So, so that's why I'm saying that how are we paring that, like, if there's a way, it's just a conversation that needs to be had. If there's a way to pare that down so that we have real numbers of how many families are here.
Should we find out, that that a family that self-reported their last permanent address to be in Pasco County, but they have been here in Pinellas, or vice versa, they are not actively, we find out that they are still physically in Pasco County, we close them out of the shelter prioritization list immediately.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like, we don't keep them open if we know that they're not here.
Okay.
But I want to make sure that
It makes sense what you said. It's not what's happening, but it makes sense what you said.
How do you confirm that? Can you just take their word for it that, oh, I'm not in Pinellas County right now?
so.
No way to validate it or verify it.
Well, so we utilize our street outreach, and also our rapid resolution, community navigators should be going out into the community and providing those light touch case management services to these families. Ara?
Isn't that how they're getting this for that done to get on the list? Is someone would have had to physically meet them here or no? So they can get on the list without a family SPDAT?
There are different qualified family shelter assessment assessors for the family shelter assessment, which is the assessment that would have to be administered for a family to appear and be, enrolled onto the shelter prioritization list. So the qualified family shelter assessors are 211 Tampa Bay Cares homeless hotline, those specialists. And then our HLA Rapid Resolution Community Navigators can also, because we do welcome anyone to submit an HLA contact form, which would be ultimately triaged and assigned to one of our community navigators, so they can do both CE and family shelter assessment. And then, of course, street outreach. Street outreach is a qualified, FSA assessor. And should they engage a family on the street, they are, and they are seeking shelter. Most of them are, if they're on the street, right? So then they would also be able to complete and administer that assessment. But did I answer your question, or did I sidetrack?
I think that's good. I just didn't know if someone was like a navigator was physically meeting them out to that would confirm that they're out.
So out of those few, SPL access points, 211 does not complete the family shelter assessment in person. They are a call center. They are taking calls. They do not go out in the community. Street outreach, of course, is in the community. And then our rapid resolution community navigators should be going. However, because we are usually back to back to back, right? In order for us to maintain and keep up with that flow of families that are getting assigned for the CE assessment to be completed by a 211 homeless helpline representative, We have been predominantly conducting the family shelter assessments through the phone. But they are also to be providing that light touch case management. So ultimately, physical contact should ultimately happen. Maybe just not on that first, that first day.
Just a weird combination, because he gets so many calls, we're starting to download his cell phone data just to see the volume, like as a data point, and it does show, I think, location of call on there, not where the cell, like the area code, but so we'll see even how many use Wi-Fi calling and rely on Wi-Fi calling and stuff like that, but you can see what area they're actually calling from as well.
Yeah, so that's a really great point. So because we're not a call center, so by the time it comes to the community navigator, we're the ones that are actually, the community navigators are the ones that are contacting those families that have been assigned by a 211 homeless helpline representative. So 211 is really great, right? Because they can probably pull that same data that you're able to pull. And also, what they're doing in their system is they're also updating and reporting on their current zip code, which can differ on the last permanent address zip code. Does someone have any other?
Oh, I was wondering, for anybody in the room who is unfamiliar with the process, could you real quick just explain what a SPDAT is?
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so I explained the family shelter assessment. So that's completely different from the coordinated entry assessment. So the coordinated entry assessment that we are utilizing again in Pinellas County, COC, is the VI SPDAT. That's for individuals. For families, it's the VIF SPDAT. And so the VI SPDAT is a vulnerability index tool that was created by ORCode. And almost all COCs, when coordinated entry was, what came out, this was the end all be all CE assessment that was being utilized, every COC, right? So this is the assessment that is being used. Now, what we're working on is we have seen that there are a lot of inequities that come with the VI SPDAT. So we have, we've had a consultant come in and create a new version of the coordinated entry assessment that is really tailored to our community. But we piloted that, it didn't work out, so we're still working on it. But to answer your question, the VI SPDAT is a vulnerability index tool to measure one's acuity. How acute are they? Are they higher need, right? So our rapid rehousing threshold scoring is for individuals, it's 4 to 9. For families, the rapid rehousing threshold score is 4 to 10. So anyone that's scoring off the measurements that the VI SPDAT is looking at based off those questions on there, that score is coming in, that assessment, the VI SPDAT is ultimately scoring up how acute or vulnerable that particular household or, individual is. Does that make sense? Did I explain that properly? Okay. And same thing for VIF SPDAT, it's just there are extra questions in there because they're a family unit, not an individual.
So I think a couple of things, in what we've discovered in the veteran world is that it almost very accurately, almost 100% accurately, if the referral is done based on that, the outcome and the success rate of the outcome is really, really high. And we've even been testing it with the families with children in the contract that we have with the county. So like we know that if the head of household entry point on the VI SPDAT is an 11, their probability of getting a rapid rehousing placement to stick long-term is substantially lower than if it was in that 6 to 8 range. And we're talking that we have data sets now going back 12 years. And so what we're seeing in communities, like if the funders are concerned about the, I'll call them carpetbaggers, the people coming in from out of the area trying to access a limited service bed for families with children. What other communities are doing is they're giving bonus points. So you would get a bonus point if you graduated Pinellas County schools, you get 5 points. That 5 points is probably gonna throw you to the top of the list. And that's how some communities are doing it. Some communities are also allocating points for Hispanic and for brown and black families, because the accusation was that those families were finding it harder to get to the top of the prioritization. So that's something that we as the COC should consider playing with if we're going to start to use these tools in wider spread populations, like all individuals. And if we're going to try to replicate a system to try to get them into housing at a rapid rate, we should really look at the COC policies and give those bonus points if the concern is that our shelter beds are going to local people, not people coming in from out of the area.
Before we went on to this slide, I just really want to quickly ask if anyone else had anything else, or this is the next slide is the next slide, or the last slide before we can actually open up the room for more questions. Yes. Mhm. All right, so this is updated information that is reflecting the length of time between project start date and housing move-in date. The data shown on this slide is from the beginning of the fiscal year, so October 1st, 2023 to today. Actually, I ran it right before I came. So the total clients served for permanent supportive housing within that reporting range that I had just shared with you. The average length of time the total clients served was 1,693 for permanent supportive housing. So that includes all individuals and families. The average length of time to housing in days. So the total, which is the cumulative between individuals and families, 453.05 days. When we look deeper into it, right? So let's look at the individuals. Individuals, 602.38 days. For families, 16.11. I did want to note one thing. So we believe that the number for individuals, therefore the total has been inflated by some VASH clients who have been left open, even though they returned to homelessness and have received new housing. This is something that we are investigating and that we're working diligently in cleaning up. But this is why there's a significant disparity and difference between the average length of time to housing in days, individuals versus families. For rapid rehousing, total clients served is 1,195. The average length of time to housing in days total is 82.5 days. And individuals specifically 58.58 days. And for families, 100.73 days. And of course, this data is compiled from FY 2024 APR report. And that is all on this slide. And that's all from coordinated entry today. Unless you guys have additional questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. Anything that needs a deeper dive into me going onto my handy computer right there, I'll have to get back to you on. But does anyone have any questions at all?
I have a question regarding the occupancy versus capacity. When you're looking at the occupancy numbers, are there any barriers? For example, you have a capacity of, let's say 20, but you're running an occupancy of 15. Is the reason you're running an occupancy of 15 because there's a barrier to housing the additional 5? Does that make sense? So for example, like maybe it's a staffing or some type of additional cost or something like that.
That's a great question. So staffing could definitely be a factor, right? If they don't have enough staff to do proper case management, they may not take on any, additional clients, right? Or may have a cap. So that way their casework is not, overwhelmed. So that could definitely be one. It could also be like if the come offline for like what am I trying to say, like remodeling or renovation. So sometimes that'll definitely impact that capacity count as well. Whereas like, maybe this month it's not available, but next month it will be available. So that can also hinder it as well.
So then if I hear you correctly, you're taking that into consideration when you look at capacity?
Yeah, so we are touching base.
Okay, so the capacity is truly the number that they can house right now.
Yes, thank you. Good question. Oh, I see some more hands. Who was first?
So I think that the other issue that had to do with the occupancy and capacity since your last meeting was that some of the funding sources that are out there that were listed on the original data set, we're assuming 100% of the funding was still available to handle that. And a lot of our instances, like we had a meeting with the city and it may have shown 140, but we're in the 11th month of a 12-month contract. There's not that capacity that's there. So we had to true up the denominator of what was actually available so that it lowered it and it showed a truer percentage.
You know,
It's available.
yes.
Well, first of all, thank you both for presenting this data in a very concise and hopefully digestible way.
You're right, hopefully.
I'm still working on it. So what I'm trying to do is I don't come from this world, so I'm being very simple here. Simple to me is motel has either it's gonna have vacancy or no vacancy. Do we have a data point here that is that vacancy, no vacancy sign?
That would most likely be that utilization, right? It's going to show you the.
Utilization's the opposite. Utilization is how many rooms are filled. I wanna know how many usable rooms I have staff for that aren't flooded, that aren't whatever, that I can fill tonight.
That'll be capacity then. Those are gonna be those true capacity counts of how many, either, clients or I keep saying units, I'm thinking about my multi-person households of how many they can handle. So that would probably be that first part of the presentation when we're talking about capacity. That's the number of clients that they're able to take.
At some point in time here, you're gonna help us bridge the cognitive gap between the data you're showing us that show that the occupancy rates for most places are not 100% for most nights, and everyone who's in this room doing this work telling us there's no bed for anybody to go to.
I see what you're asking.
I think you need a department to oversee that. That's what I used to do. I was a duty officer. My job in the city I was in was to make calls and count, and I knew a factual count and ratio of what we had for occupancy and what our capacity was for more, especially in specialized environments. So that's what I did. That was my whole job.
And I only ask this question because if the media gets a hold of these numbers,
Yeah. that's what
Exactly.
I'm-
it's not gonna be
This
good.
is not what we've been operating at.
If the numbers, if they see it and it doesn't reflect the reality that someone who's homeless today is of those 2,100 is gonna experience, then we're not doing justice to it, right?
So I need to rethink the way we're presenting the data. Absolutely. That's something we can definitely circle back to. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thank you, as first, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just trying to do the simple math in one of the charts, so thinking that on slide, page 9. Doing math, what I'm seeing then is that as a system, we may have 296. Right, I just wanna make sure I'm looking. Don't have full, so. Client chart, bed capacity, utilization, results in number of open beds. And my math.
I'm so sorry. Do you have the slide in your thing?
It is not. We're up number 28.
Oh, there's page numbers and slide.
Yeah.
Is it?
Starts off with, and also 200 clients, bed capacity 220.
Found it.
1%
One
utilization.
back.
Thank you.
Slide 28 on page 9. Okay, apologies.
I think it would be helpful for totals to be at the bottom, because, again, I did rough math over here, but it looks like 296 open beds as a system. I think that's what we have to talk about. Like, what is the true barrier to entrance into those 296 beds? Is it staffing? Are those beds really offline? And then I think one of the recommendations from the last meeting was, could there be more? So could some of these operate with, like, and I'll just use Catholic Charities Pinellas. So could you go to 250 if you had more staffing? Is it a staffing issue? Is it a funding issue? That's the number I think we need to get to really understand what our true capacity is as a system with what's existing.
they may speak more to this later, but I know HLA has definitely been reaching out to providers this past week to figure out, you know, what their true capacity is and if they for more clients. So we are still, if I'm not mistaken, are we still compiling that data?
Yes, we are.
But that's the in addition to, right? So this number, this, if not all of our providers are at 100%. Well, what is that barrier, that 296? What's the plan to fill that? Is that a real number? Or is it staffing issues, beds offline? Because I think you answered that the capacity is adjusted when that happens. I don't know that I'm familiar with that process, that if a unit comes offline because it was flooded or, you know, maybe dismantled, is that bed capacity actively being managed all the time so that we know what true capacity is for our systems?
So great question. So HMIS regularly checks in on bed inventory and unit inventory. If a provider has an update to their bed inventory, we do ask that the provider reach out to us with any changes, so that way we are able to update the database. That was before. Now, of course, in this new state, right, where we're actively looking at inventory, not just for beds, but for units, we are weekly going through our inventory to make sure that it is up to date and correct.
Also, but Karen, I want to point out to you that that number that you're looking at also turning points in there. And so they're specialized as well. So we might want to even delve a little bit deeper as far as like non-specialty to how many beds are actually available. But we only can pull what people put in. And if it takes a day or 2 days to put somebody into a bed, we don't know that until it's input. Short of calling a shelter and saying, how many beds do you have available today? That's the only other option that we would have being able to do, honestly speaking.
And yes.
Oh, I love that we can see this full list of all the programs. I think part of it is, you know, our street outreach teams, they know the ones that are close to them and probably don't know what all the criteria are to get into all these other programs to be able to screen someone for it, nor do they probably have the time or capacity to do that. So if there is potential to move to something that is more kind of coordinated entry where you could match people up where they'd be a good fit or where there may be availability for certain things. Like, you know, they might be a good fit for West Care if that's what their situation is, but if it's not in the mindset, or we don't know if there's an hourly or a nightly fee for it, or this, that, or the other, like, I know you've been doing too, like if they have even Social Security income, if they can pay for a pod at Pinellas Hope, for example, that's one of those criteria he thinks about for what beds to match up and things like that too, but. So.
Yes.
You were before me. Go ahead.
So for the purposes of this law going into effect and us trying to gauge how big it was this tidal wave potentially going to be, on the flip side, do we need to look at the PIT data and other data you have from the actual individuals, those 2,100, and figure out how many are sleeping in cars a night, how many are couch surfing a night, and how many are actually in a tent or otherwise in a public space and in jeopardy of falling into this?
That was gonna be part of my question, like people that are sheltered, quite frankly, for the purposes of this, really doesn't matter. We wanna look at the people who are not sheltered and figure out where they can go. So for like the specialty, if we could remove them, because you can only go, like I can't put anybody in medical respite, that has to come from Baycare to those facilities, right? So if we can just get rid of the specialty ones and have true emergency shelter, bed capacity versus versus the clients, and I think that would help. Recognizing that it's on the shelter, sometimes shelters don't have the ability to, you know, they don't know that a place might come off of offline. But then I would ask Joe, just because you're sitting here and yours is first, you know, like, did you not have, I mean, you're mostly full, right? So, but there could have been those 20, the bed capacity is 220 is what they have here. So there could have been those 20 because you had people coming in, people absolutely came in.
Fluctuate every day.
Right.
And
So-
and staffing is also one of the other elements, you know, we're always looking for more staff.
Right, so I guess my ask would be to look at the people who are unsheltered and see. Not specialty shelters, but just true emergency shelters, what their capacity is. What their clients' bed capacity and utilization is, so that we know where we have space, right? That's because. We can say all day long, hey, we're gonna send you to Safe Harbor, but everybody's gonna be able to get up there for whatever reason, right? And so, but if I know there's space at St. Vincent de Paul, I know there's space at Salvation Army right away, then I'm like, okay, there's 15 spaces here, right here in St. Pete, maybe I'm not offering you Safe Harbor because maybe you can't get there, maybe I'm offering you a space here. I think if we see that and not look at people who are already in shelter, because that doesn't matter at this point.
But if we could move them out, it does matter. So this is a very, very fluid situation and, you know, I was chairing the HLB board at the time that coordinated entry was developed in circa 2015. And we had to negotiate with the shelter providers at that point in time because in the true spirit of coordinated entry would be coordinating into shelter. Our coordinated entry and all of the data that they reported is coordinating out of shelter. It's downstream from where it needs to be. And at that point in time, there was not the political will to allow the COC to have the say in who goes into that next shelter bed. There was only 1 or 2 shelters that were willing to comply, and it just don't work if only 1 or 2 are gonna play that way. Now, the beauty of this conversation in Pinellas, and we work in 11 COCs, so I'm in 11 of these conversations on a regular basis, is we actually have shelter capacity. If we were on this conversation on the other side of the bay, they don't have this capacity. They don't even have 500 shelter beds for individuals countywide. So we have to look at 2 things. We have to look at how can we move the people into shelter, out of shelter to create capacity into shelter so the sheriff doesn't have to arrest them and put them on 49th Street. The other thing we need to really, really take a look at is we need active day-to-day data collection at the front door. And please stop using the word pit as valid data. That was a photo that was taken in January. I can tell you that those people don't exist in where they were in January. We need to set up a data collection system at the front door of the system that when we go to bed at night, we have a really good sense of who is where and also have data attached to that household that shows like a VI SPDAT score so that we can know what the outcome is. Because that's the only way that we're going to manage this solution. And we need to look at the system that has worked for this community, and we need to try to replicate the system that we could put into place for veterans, because we were sitting here in 2012, 12 years ago with 2,850 vets on the street. And you looked at what the numbers were today, and I am telling you that 100, that there's only 10 to 15 of those that don't already have a solution attached to them. This is the exact same situation that we're now in for individuals. Now, I know you're going to immediately say the funding isn't there, the money didn't come through. We have to have a disregard for that at this point in time. And we need to try to figure out what we're going to do. We should have a 60-day data collection thing so that we can get together by August 1st and say, this is what the true picture is. How many of them can we get back to Tennessee or wherever the hell they came from? And tell them, look, staying here after October 1 is going to be very dangerous for you. We have to get you out of our community by October 1. And that's the message that even needs to go out in a press release, is that if it does come to be, and, you know, Bob's not here to defend himself, but Zach is, he can't arrest his way out of this.
He doesn't want to.
And he doesn't want to.
I mean, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but no, Aaron was at the meeting, I was, Daisy, Kathleen. We've had multiple meetings with the sheriff. We've come up with mechanisms on how to address this to make sure that the jail doesn't turn into a homeless shelter like it did pre-Safe Harbor's existence. Law enforcement's knee-jerk response to this, and now their forced knee-jerk response is that the governor signed the bill, it's done. There's no having it on. The sheriff doesn't want it. So we're coming up with a plan. We've got a temporary solution. You know, we're we're literally doing everything that we can to make sure that this population that is sleeping in the public places on the streets at nighttime are not gonna wind up in jail. And if they wind up in jail, it is because they three-strike themselves and chose to go to jail. And we don't want them to go to jail either. And that's why we've got these engagement services that we're gonna start and get out there and start spreading the word.
To Michael's point, do we have how many are actively enrolled in street outreach right now? Throughout the county? I mean, I know there's not full coverage across the county either, but. Okay.
You know what? That might be different, so, because I just had April like close. The math close, because why are we keeping them open? Because it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work for our data. It's not true data if you're not actively working with someone, right? So we're not keeping someone open 30 days because you're not touching them every single day. We keep them open because they need the time for,
But those are
chronicity.
the ones that are open are probably the
Right.
ones that are waiting for placement and shelter. So that,
Or could be ones that you're just connecting with every day and you're having a conversation for chronicity, not necessarily for shelter, because everybody doesn't want to go to shelter, but they want to have, they might want to be housed and they need that chronicity, because they have mental health or whatever, like, so it might not be for shelter, so we, clean up our data. But that's a good starting point, though, because then wherever there's street outreach, we at least know where, so we've already started having the conversations in St. Pete. But I think that is a good starting point of who's open in street outreach, and then we will know where people are.
this is something we could measure real time, like
Right.
at any point.
So we're looking at a code enforcement model in Hillsborough. So the way that the county and the municipalities manage code enforcement is that they zone it and that they have vehicles and officers and it's just a very, very small zone, similar to police zones, where we're going to be deploying workers in the veteran space based on square miles, and they're going to be patrolling that on a daily basis in an effort to. Our goal in partnership with the VA, and Judith and I just flew back from Washington this morning to be here for this meeting, because we've been in discussions with the VA program office on how to solve this, is our goal is to get everybody off the street by October 1. No matter what happens, you're going to see a surge announced at Bay Pines, you're going to see a surge announced at James Haley, and we're going to push to try to pull them in off the street and pull the money into community to at least get the veterans out of as many as we can out of the fray. And offer them COVID type interventions, which we had a lot more freedom. So we're pushing for that. But I think that the whole community needs to begin to take a look at that. And the people that are most vulnerable in this are the ones that we've been ignoring all this time, which is the individual male and the individual female that are on the street. It's the largest piece of the population. It's the lowest amount of funding in the population. And it's the hardest to grab, and we've really got to beef up the diversion process. And we can replicate the rapid resolution that the HLA staff, we can replicate that training in overnight to try to get rapid resolution folks on here. We've got to try to get bus ticket money available to say October 1 is just not safe for you to be here. Like, we can't guarantee what's going to happen to you. And I think that that'll dramatically reduce the number quickly once the word gets out that things have changed.
One thing I've noticed though, I work for the city of Tampa, homeless outreach for the city. It's much easier to get a diversion back home in Tampa than it is Pinellas County. Nobody wants to leave here. Even if you say this is coming down the pipe, it's a different environment. People want to stay. They think it's going to be a holiday. I got 2 families that are maybe going back next week. And I've had to really coax them and work with them over time to buy into the fact that this is not going to work for you. You don't have any resources. There's nothing I can get for you immediately, especially with families. It is a really different environment. That's the one thing I can see just from one county over. People would take, I used to send out from the bus station downtown Tampa, 15 a week diversions. Here, I can't even give one away. They all want to stay here and try to ride it out. I'm gonna see what I can do here. And it is a different environment here, just in one county over.
What's the environment that makes them want to stay here? What are the factors that say I want to stay here versus in Hillsborough?
Yeah, it really is. It's a habitat. There it's downtown, if you know where downtown Tampa, you're down by the graveyard and all that area. You know, I worked it every day and you're out in Bush, you're out in Lois, some of these areas, they can't wait to get back to where they're from. Compared to down here. A lot of supports and services in Clearwater and, you know.
So it's the meals, because I've heard it's the feeding that goes around, you know.
Good. I mean, there was feedings there. We had some issues with the mayor's office. We were always dealing with public feedings and how they were trying to get that under control because of the debris and all the things that were happening with it. But it was a different environment. I don't know.
The other issue is, and if you go to downtown Tampa at 9 o'clock tonight, there's literally nothing open. If you go to downtown St. Petersburg at 9 o'clock, you're gonna wait 45 minutes to get a table at a restaurant, and I can't speak to Clearwater. But I gotta tell you that it's a very different, our downtowns are very different on this side of the bay. Tampa is still dead. And that's a problem.
Arrow, I know, and then Helen, and then, Spagna.
Oh, I was gonna say, I was really impressed at the rapid rehousing timeframe for individuals. I think it was 56 days, and I noticed it was a huge discrepancy with families. So even trying to figure out what components, and it's probably totally different because whatever's working for individuals probably is not the same necessarily for families, but figuring out how we get that time frame closer to that individual level, even though there's far more individuals and, you know, likely one income. I mean, there probably is a lot of families too, but just maybe looking at two different ways of how we need to tackle it.
Could also be though, how many individuals are actually being housed versus the number of families being housed, like how many, cause.
Your numbers.
Individuals being brought in, right,
Yeah.
it's very different for families, right? And the unit size, so where you can put an individual, they can home share, essentially, right? Is different for families, but I know in the collab, more families are there. There's more access to rapid rehousing for families than there is for individuals, I guess is the right way to say it.
It's also a lot about the program entry and how they create that starting point. Some people, like medical term, you have your pre-admit and admit, and so some programs will do that onboarding paperwork process as part of their length of stay, which then exaggerates how long it takes them to house someone or how the referrals coming in. So that plays a big part in it. And I'll use the BASH vouchers, right? BASH voucher, they can get rapid, SSVF and get their deposit right in. So that's a really quick entry versus the family is referred, has to find a unit, and then when that unit is identified, do the request.
And the number of days is still suffering from the COVID hangover. So there's still a lot of that caseload that was open during COVID and so we're still suffering that, but that is on a downward trend now. And we track days to housing on our caseload. We've got 1,700 open households to us right now. And I'm tracking that number of length of stay into housing on a weekly. I can draw all the way down to the case manager and tell you, you know, and I can say, why is it taking you 61 days and it's taking Joe 31 days and you two are working next to each other? What is Joe doing that you ain't doing? And we have those conversations internally at our place. Like there's pressure on them to house. We're about to announce 5,000 into housing this week. SVDP is going to move 5,000 since the beginning of the pandemic. We're 4,979 today. So within the next 7 days, we'll have put 5,000 into housing since the pandemic.
Right, Kathleen?
Yeah, I had two questions. So what is the possibility of having those daily phone calls to our shelter providers to get a daily actual count? You know, whether it's an evening count, you know, call in the evening at 5 or 8, like, all right, how many beds do you have filled and how many are not filled? And have that on a public dashboard, like, so that street outreach people know where there might be availability.
Is it a call or is it just making sure that shelters have accurate bed counts in HMIS?
So it's both, right? Yeah, so Session's been asking for that information. But I think internally with HMIS, I don't even know the capacity to do that, but if we do, then we can start making those phone calls and having that data as much up to date as possible.
Can't you use technology? Can't it be a Survey Monkey or something? Someone just goes in and enters and you just call those in?
No, just HMIS. HMIS has the ability to do this. That's not something.
Well, so do you check and make sure that they did an entry last night?
But we don't check, our place doesn't check in till 7 p. So, and then we scan in every night at 7 p. So I don't know that we reset the number. that's a really good question, because I don't even know it about my shop in downtown CP. I can tell you that we're at 125% full at the street shelter in CP every night. So we're not gonna ever announce to you that we've got 21 vacancies. It just literally, in the 12 years that I've been there, we've never had a night where we've had an opening. It just doesn't work that way. But I don't know that, like you scan, we boarded a plane today and they were scanning and you could go 31 to board, 29 to board, 28 to board, 20. I don't know that that is possible, but like our data would not be available until 8 o'clock at night. And that was assuming, same with him, that's assuming that we would be scanning at that time too, because there are other times too where we don't scan until 9 or 10 o'clock. Just because it's when we get to it.
But you know, if you make a phone call, what's your first name again?
Todd.
Todd, so how'd you do it in the city you worked with your?
So I
phone
had
calls
I had
daily?
6 computers in front of me. We would do every 2 hours, we would call every facility out in front of us and get bed counts,
Every 2 hours, not just once a day?
duty officer
There's
oversight.
gotta be something though,
Oversight.
that, like you're talking about with the things though, that would show how many open beds and as you assign.
We have to look at HMIS if it has the capacity to do that, and we'll have to request that information from everybody.
Yeah, there would be a custom report for HMIS, I believe, but I mean, they can toggle between, but the part that's missing a lot is that someone has a hold. Hey, this guy's coming in at 12 today. So if I pull it at 10, they're not gonna be, it will look like.
Or you can mark it as
guys. Or with the family being a coordinated process, that takes sometimes 2 to 3 or more days because you don't anticipate the opening until the family's gone. Then you have to request it. And then, so that's one thing that we can improve upon is tightening that intake process. And they've tried to do that also with the coordinated entry for, Rapid Housing and PSH is that you anticipate the opening so it can tighten up the referral time.
But even with that, so street outreach, like, is there something in HMIS right now where he could see, I mean, we get the weekly list, I guess. So that's where he would look and say, okay, let me check this one since this one's full, like he'd be looking at that list. Is that
So they wouldn't be able to see all of the providers first up because of their levels. Okay, so there's levels in HMIS. However, HMIS has purchased a custom report that we're creating for occupancy and for capacity so that anyone can pull this report at any given time. So we purchased, it was $8,300 and we purchased it through HMIS. And there's also something else we're looking into is an app with WellSky that would have it for the street outreach workers where they could see, but we have to make sure that they would have the capacity to be able to see everything that they would need to see as far as who has a bed available at any given time. You have safe harbor, people have to be in house by 9 o'clock at night. There's not gonna be a street outreach worker out there at that hour to see if there's a bed available. So St. Vincent de Paul, you said 7 o'clock, right? Street outreach workers aren't out there at 7 o'clock at night. So they wouldn't know at that point how many beds would be open.
But if entry is only like once a week at some places or twice a week, that wouldn't matter until that day either, right? Cause it's gonna change until that day. So it's not like, oh, there's an open bed here, I'm gonna go place you there now, right? It would be getting on that list for intake or whatever the next day.
I think the missing data piece is the people that are on those who are on the street that are seeking shelter and that we don't know how many are either refusing the shelter bed because the city's always calling me, they don't want to go there. And I'm like, well, then don't send them here. But how many are seeking it and there is no availability, or how many are actually refusing to be sheltered in our community? Because I gotta tell you, if we get to the point that we have 2,000 out of the 2,000, we have 1,100 that are refusing shelter in our community, which means they're refusing a housing intervention, they're refusing a housing placement, and I say, Zach, lock them up. Enough is enough.
So the part of the thing that we've been doing is get a collective count on how many individuals are sleeping in public places, not private places. If they're sleeping on McDonald's step and McDonald's doesn't want to decide to call and make it an issue, then it's not a public place. But as far as the beaches, the parking lots that are owned by municipal buildings or county buildings, just law enforcement going around for the last about month, it looks like there's about 350 people that are observed by law enforcement overnight sleeping. This doesn't mean during the day they're hanging out in the park. This is asleep at night or appearing to be asleep at night in a public place. It looks like there's about 350 people. Those are just the ones we drive around and observe. And those are the ones that are gonna be the risk of being called in and reported to the counties, and then we start the 5-day cure period to take action against it and all these things, so that cities and counties don't get sued. It looks like there's about 350 people.
So, but the solution to that, I know some of you just thought yourself, all we have to do is add 350 beds to the shelter and we've got that. So that's not right, because they're not gonna go in.
No, because there's probably, God knows how many of these people don't want anything to do with services. They're on the street and they're happy and they want to be left alone.
To that point, do we have a certain message that we are giving everybody to say? I know our message might be different than what, I just want to make sure like throughout street outreach, everyone is giving the same message to individuals who are in those public spaces. I don't know if we've come up with that yet, but I know like, so there's street outreach in St. Pete in different places. Like we have street outreach through our person, but there's also DFL at PSTA. They're in Gulfport, they're in Treasure Island, they're in different places, right? And so I'm wanting to make sure that we're all given the same message. I don't know if that's somewhere on the agenda or not.
Yeah, so we were gonna talk about the press release that we had mentioned from the last meeting, and also the flyer that we wanted the educational flyer that we wanted to give to outreach and then to the community so that they know what the law means, what the expectations are. We really want to work closely with the sheriff's department. So if you have those clients that are refusing services, what can we do to get street outreach to them too, to involve them in some of our programs? So that flyer we do have on the agenda to review, and then we can add and change things to it as well, so that we can print it out and start.
So that's gonna be different for municipalities. I know there was some conversation about dusk to dawn, but in our city, there's a park that's open till 11, and so we can't change that. It's open till 11, right? And I know in other municipalities, parks may close at different times, but some of our parks close at dusk, one of them closes at 11. So that's gonna look different by municipality. So I just wanna make sure we're all saying the same thing as best as we can.
I think it's just gonna be, how do we navigate, or how do they navigate the system? Where do they go? Who do they talk to? If they don't want to go to this particular shelter, what other options are there? And what can we do as a citizen to help our clients that night or the next night, so that they avoid, the sheriffs avoid getting them into jail, because sure, the sheriff's department said that that's not what they want to do. That's like the last resort. But we want to make sure that we're working together to get the clients, whatever program we decide to do, or however the system, how we want to route the clients to. Okay. For the sake of time, I'm just gonna go ahead and continue to move on, because I did want to leave some time for group activity, or just more conversation between your groups. Slide, please. So based on and I don't know if you want these on the table, from the last conversation we had, we came up with a lot of different ideas on the easel pad regarding funds, needs, hurdles, advocacy, and the data that we were looking at. So this is just kind of putting everything into a spreadsheet to talk about what were the needs for the community, and also what some of ideas that we were looking at. And some of the areas of review that we were looking that came up were, so we were looking at shelter space, parking lots, the wagon wheel came up. There was a conversation about mobile classrooms, that they were vacant, and how can we use those? Can we put those in a vacant space? I know I had mentioned hotel motels were an idea as well. Involving the hospitals to get in with the exit strategies that they're doing, increasing animal shelters as well, making sure that they're able to take some of our clients' pets. There was a mention about chip buildings, strategies, increasing access days to shelter, and increasing access to storage, because we know that is a big area of concern. And then also veteran housing options were kind of some of the ideas that were discussed. The other conversation that was discussed too was the cost, and this is really rough estimates of based on some of the conversations that we were having with some of the providers on what does it take per day? What is the cost per day for shelter, for jailing somebody at Pinellas, Pinellas Safe Harbor? It's roughly estimate of $31 per day. We're looking at Pinellas Hope, we're looking at between $27 to $28 per day to assist a client. We have Safe Haven is looking at 150. We even looked at the camping grounds because we do have camps around the area. When I looked at it, it was $41 per day. And that is including Wi-Fi, electricity, and everything is there. So I know there was a suggestion. It was like, what if we reach out to the camping grounds to see if they can just take on our clients? But that's $41.
That's, one of them, the one in Tarpon is $116. I don't know where the $41 comes.
I found,
per person.
yeah. So that, I mean, regardless, it's expensive, right? To use an existing ground, to even temporarily, where are we gonna fund that from? And this could be, changed or just adjusted with permanent supportive housing. Is it 250,000 to serve an estimate of 30 to 40 clients? We really have to look at that. And if we're serving our individuals at the different shelters, we're looking at, roughly $5 million annually if we had everybody in shelter. I mean, obviously that's not gonna happen, but this is kind of like the numbers that we're looking at. What do we do? And these are gonna be rotating in and out, and some clients are through diversion are gonna be leaving the community if they have other places to go to. So do we invest in more diversion, which would be great? Are we looking at increasing capacity beds in different shelters? I know I visited Joe and he has a really good system there. And I know you increased your bed count by 25, but even that is a lot of work because you still have to have case management and you have to have more food and electricity costs and all of that. So it takes a long time to build that up. And how else can we, increase capacity in other areas? Or do we just focus more on that rapid resolution and diversion efforts to help clients move in different areas? So this is just kind of like a brief cost overview. And go to the next one. This is kind of like the camping fees that I was looking at. They had 40 to 45, 42 night rate. So this is kind of where I was getting that 41 number at. So the flyer that I was mentioning, and I will send this out and have an opportunity to print it out. We were looking at getting the most common asked questions. What is the camping law, anti-camping law? What is the impact? What does public property mean? How does it affect individuals? These are just kind of common questions. And this is just more informational. So if we want to do another flyer, if we want to add more information to this, we could definitely do that. There is social media that we want to put out to HOA's website. There was a mention about conversations with media, which we want to be really mindful of how we do that. And also looking at HLA coordinated entry tracking. How do we track, the clients that are coming into our system, and how do we work with the Sheriff's Department to get that data the most up to date as possible? So I can send out this information. I can send out the flyer if you have different suggestions of how to do that or what to add. We could definitely do that as well. I didn't put the media release or the press release on this slide, but it is in your packet. And you could definitely look at what we started out as a basis to do the press release. If you have any suggestions, concerns, anything that we want to add, it's a draft. So the costs and consequences on the bottom paragraph is not fully completed. because we were trying to get more information as to what we want to put in here before we go ahead and send that media release out. But if you want to take a look at that, review it, and please provide me the information, we can definitely look at it with Victoria, and then we can change it, take it out to the COC for approvals, and then we can post it on our websites.
I have a question about the flyer you all were just showing, or suggestion, I should say. Family Resources does have the street outreach, but their beds, I think, are 12 and being utilized at 1. So that takes up a big chunk of that resource card, and really my idea was we need that font to be as big as possible, as digestible as possible, but also like that one resource really impacts 1 to 12 people at a time. So how can we tighten up where everything's a little bit bigger and a little bit clearer? It would be my suggestion for this.
Okay.
Well, and I would,
Public property, even just taking off the 2 public property. Like, how do you make it just as bare bones as possible?
Yeah. Okay.
and I would take off is it FS, is that Florida statute, that number? I mean, nobody cares about that number, right? It's anti-camping law or whatever you want to put up there. I mean, that doesn't have to be really big. I don't even know, I have to keep looking up the House Bill 1356 or whatever it is, but,
Yeah, so
You know,
keep
that-
it.
that
just
doesn't have to be
simple
up
as
there.
possible.
People on the street, I don't remember it, they're not gonna remember it.
So this is aimed at providing information to people experiencing homelessness, right?
Correct.
So that question about do individuals have to receive certification from DCF, that's completely not applicable.
Yeah.
There's
That's just a really common question that we've received.
like from people on the street.
Our lived experience committee, that was a question that came up several times during that committee, so we figured, do we put that up there because they keep getting, we keep getting that question.
Folks
And we're like, well, no, DCF is not gonna certify you, it's the space that they were thinking about in the. So, I mean, we can remove it.
I just think that question and answer provides more questions.
Well, in DCF in general, that, I mean, if I'm a family and I read that, that might immediately make me stop reading it. Just seeing that, right?
Hey, we talk about space, getting it bigger to look. Can we narrow it down to one QR code and take all of those other QR codes off? That gives us the space to make it bigger and add a little more information for clarity. As opposed to having each individual in there, you've got one QR code they're gonna go to, they're all gonna be on that QR code, as opposed to having each individual QR code. Does that make sense?
Yes.
A new page on this page that has just those links.
Yes.
How many of those on the right are in the homeless resource guide?
Yes,
So I mean.
so yeah, we can just link it to that.
You could probably eliminate that whole side. I mean, it probably, if its intent is to educate on what's available, because I think the sheriff's office and other municipalities are educating on the law. Like, I think it needs to be just really pointed. What are you trying to educate them about? Is it the understanding of the law, or is it what's available? If it's what's available, couple it with the yellow book, 'cause that's already in production, already has 211.
So I think it's both, because some people don't understand, clients are not gonna understand what the law means, but they want to get some information on what it is, and then also, okay, so now I know what it is, where do I go? So I think it's a little bit of
I think it's a sense of urgency. I mean, people talk and it's out there, it's gonna be out there, and I think it's like, oh, well, this is what they're all talking about. Rather than the yellow book that's been around a few years.
I don't see the person sleeping, and I am bare bones in this, I just don't see the person sleeping on the park bench with the can of Old English at his feet and his world's belongings on the other side of the bench, reading any of this. Am I the only one that feels that way?
I was thinking the same thing, like maybe this needs to be pared down a lot and it needs to be not. At a level where people are gonna understand it, where everyone can get it.
Plain language.
So what
Plainer
is the
language.
law? What is public property? Where can they go? I mean, just, to me, that, The one, I mean, it's kind of, there's two things. So basically you're telling them that nothing's gonna happen. No, this is not a part of the law. Somewhere it impacts the local government, but we're telling them that we want them to go somewhere. So if it's only impacting the local government, then I don't care. I'm gonna sleep right here. So I think it's almost giving information that they don't need, right? Not that they don't, I mean, they're getting it from us already, because we're having these conversations, right? But in this, when I'm trying to give you information like, oh, this is the law, this is what's gonna happen, and where can I go so that it doesn't impact me? Like, how does it impact me?
Yeah, I get it. Okay.
So I would agree with that. And then also, so I know, at my hospital, we have, quite a few individuals that, do sleep on our grounds. And when we try to talk to them about shelter, the questions they ask are things like, can I take my dog? Can I store my belongings? You know, the people that are maybe apprehensive about seeking some of the services available. And so maybe if we had some questions geared towards that, because if they're already on the list and they're already seeking resources, I don't know that they need this as much because they're already trying to get those resources. And if, I mean, what is the help in us saying like, oh, and by the way, now you're gonna be criminalized? Like, because you're not getting those resources, you know what I mean? So I'm thinking like, maybe we need to think about the audience a little different about, and some of those just, and again, the plain language. Those are the questions that I constantly get. The people that are not interested are, it's very basic things. It is very basic things. What is the curfew? What are the rules there? Things like that are what they're asking us. So just.
This is really good information.
And also I understand the lived experience, advisory committee has given feedback, but like street outreach has engaged with individuals, but also like discussion groups, have there been focus groups at some of these shelters to understand where the street is or at the park? And if street outreach has done that, what are the questions being asked?
Yeah, so we are asking, as part of our conversations with people, why don't you want to go to shelter? Because that was part of a meeting that we had at the Unitarian Church. So we've tasked street outreach path with asking those questions. If you say you don't want to go to shelter, tell me why. What's going on at this specific shelter versus this shelter, and why don't you want to go there? So April is compiling that information for us on our end, but that's our ask. But we're also like recognizing that St. Vincent de Paul has a shelter, but the street is not St. Vincent de Paul's, that sidewalk isn't, right? So we're out there literally every single day having these conversations with people in front of the sidewalk, on the sidewalk there, that, hey, this is happening.
What, can I ask Chrissy, what are some of the common reasons about people not wanting to go to the shelters?
Well, one, they don't want to go to a jail. Feel like they're going to jail. Another, it's too hot to be in a tent. And it's not private. They don't want to be surrounded by people, you know, they want their space.
You can switch the narrative around. This is what I keep saying. We keep saying just go to shelter. You can't sell this as a shelter. It's a housing program. This is opportunity for you to get off the street and get rehoused. Out here, you may be living where you want to live or by the lake or by whatever, but it's not going to get you where you want to go. It's how you market it. I can buy a Chev or I can buy a Corvette. They're both made in the same factory, but they're not the same car. And so this is what I'm saying. Pinellas Hope, for example, great example. Somebody will go, well, I don't want to stay in Tent City. Well, once again, it's not called Tent City, it's called Pinellas Hope. There's hope in there. I want to give you hope. Let's go there. We'll see. Do you have any SSI come in? We could get you a cabinet if you can't. You put your name on the list if there's none there. But what you're going to get is you're going to get a housing support. You're going to get somebody that knows the system. You can work on your resume, get a job. Oh, I'd love to get a job, but I can't go out on the street. Exactly. You can have a shower. That can mean you're clean and get you, maybe get some clothes, get yourself presentable and ready to do that sort of thing to get hired. That's how you sell it. You don't say you want to go to shelter, because who wants to go to shelter? No one. Or it's a safe place. I can say Safe Harbor. I go, you have sheriffs there. It's a safe, you got people around. It's a safe environment. You don't have that in the bushes.
Say interim housing.
Yeah.
Interim housing. You want to be housed or just the interim?
You have people there to keep you safe. You're a female by yourself. Well, this guy creeped up on me, and get into shelter, at least get somewhere and we can work on it for you. So that's how you have to market that.
Another one of the challenges is if they've gotten in trouble before, they can't go back.
Right.
And a lot of times people have phone calls, that they have to get in line and behave. And it takes some time.
That's a phone call.
It's a phone call.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as work is concerned, it is a phone call. Unless you've got violent with staff or you're dealing drugs out there, it's a phone call. Those two things, I'm not letting you back. I got enough front you. You're violent with staff or you're dealing drugs out there, you're out of gas. But everything else is a phone call or a text or however Helen decides to get them.
So
Managers are really
all
good
those
about
things
putting
are,
those notes in, so they tell me a lot, like, oh, I'm not allowed to go there, they said I can never come back. Okay, well, let me get your name, let me look you up and look, oh, look, it just said it's a, for the day, you missed curfew or whatever the case was, like, that's not accurate.
we work with all our outreach people and we'll make special admissions, on different days of the week. Just, all it is a phone call, and all those things that Todd just said are true. We provide the hope, we provide the resources, we provide all that. But that being said, the success rate is still, it's really good for us. It's in the 40% range, 45% range. But that means 55% of the people don't get housed. So they're going back on the street, we can't keep them forever. I got some people that are way too long because I can't put them out. I won't put them out. They're too vulnerable. But there still is, when I meet people, when they come in the shelter, I say, we have a great success rate, 45%. So you can really be active and you can be successful here. But that means 55% of you aren't gonna get it. So which one do you wanna be, 45% or 55%? It depends on you.
My
And
team
that's the reality, that these guys are going back on the street. A lot of them are.
My team is really honest about like what it is, right? Like Safe Harbor, there's a lot of negative things that are said about it, but at the same time, like we have to have rules established to keep everyone safe, to keep everyone there, to keep it open and running for those folks. So we tell them like, hey, use that for what it is, right? Like you said, that you can come out of their house if you communicate with your case manager, if you follow what you're supposed to be doing. If you're not just sitting around and waiting for something to fall in your lap, like that's not gonna happen, right? Not just for our clients, but also for us in general, right? We can't just sit around and expect something to happen. So if we are leading with that truth and we are leading with that program is designed to help you get out of this situation. You're sick and tired? Great, let's get in there and let's really put some work and effort in. As long as you're communicating and talking and doing what you're supposed to be doing, like it can work out for you. So
You need those mental health supports too.
Yeah.
That are, almost everyone needs, and you might,
And usually my first question is if they say something negative about either place. Have you ever been there? And a lot of times it's no.
no, my friends went there and yeah.
Telephone, sharing information from the next person.
So would this flyer be a good opportunity for us to say, like, you can't do this, but these are programs that they like, go ahead and change that narrative now, and then also. Although I was saying this too, you gotta tell them what their role is gonna be a little bit, like, you're gonna be a part in getting yourself rehoused, here's the program.
be a partner with us.
Yeah, so make it really a message, not a handout, but a, like, we're here to help get you to your,
And yeah, and with these discussions, I think it takes us to the next step about what's the action plan. So we do have on your packet some kind of like a action plan, SMART goals, chart of all of these ideas and how do we put this into action? So we really want to make sure that we're looking at all of this and then within the next couple of weeks or so, whether that's a COC or HLA, we're taking action in all of these great ideas. We're moving the press release forward. We're changing the flyer. We're advocating for, how to change the narrative of the scope of all of the shelters and all of the facilities that we have available. Really work with our outreach team. So if you can get in your circles or in your groups and kind of start writing out what are the next action steps, who is in charge of that, what we want for the outcomes and what the timeline is for all of these ideas and how we can start moving that forward. Because we really want to ensure that we're not just having conversations, but we're really taking the next step to make all of it happen. So if you want to take 5 minutes and then get back into your groups and start working on the action plan, we can go ahead and do that. Or if you want to just jump right in, that's up to you as well. It's 3:19 right now. Just jump in. Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
So what is because I missed the first meeting and I don't want to go back in time. The exact goal of the task force. Because I'm looking around this room and I don't see anybody that pushed for this damn task force. And I'm not putting anybody on blast, but I do not see the people that were loudest on pushing for the task force.
We sent an invite to a lot of people. And so the idea of this task force was to look at costs, funding, what do we need to do as far as do we fund another shelter? Do we get more case management? Do we create another like diversion program? Like where do we invest our money in to help the clients that we currently have? Do we put our money into factory housing? I know I had mentioned hotel motels because I worked with our veteran population during the pandemic, but that wasn't I don't think people were really happy about that, but you know, those are ideas and that's kind of what this whole task force was, and the educational piece and making sure that we advertise this or we send out the press releases and educate our community. So that's the idea of the task force.
So
Initially.
I thought the idea was to figure out what we're doing, what we're gonna do, and how we're gonna get it. Like, that's what I thought the idea for the task force was. Like, what are we doing? How are we gonna get to the point of those 300 and whatever people are not being arrested? And everybody's not gonna go to safe harbor because we're not gonna create another homeless shelter, right? But and then on the end side of that, to my point, how do we get the people out of shelter who are there so that we can keep the flow going, right? Recognizing that we only have shelters in specific places and we don't necessarily, I mean, do we need to create more shelters? Or do we utilize what we have and move people out and in? That's what I thought.
Sorry, Gary.
I don't think that this is a brainstorming activity. I mean, I think we need to break down the systemic flow section by section from the front door all the way through to the placements, and we need to look at what's working, what's not working, and we need to develop strategies for all of that movement. Like, I'm really concerned about discharges out of shelter, and we're seeing discharges out of shelter being discharged to permanent housing, but there's no address of where the person's going, and then the person is reappearing in shelter in a week, but that discharge in shelter is not being fit to permanent housing. It's not being fixed, and there's claiming 40% discharge into permanent housing. There's no way.
They're coming same day to safe harbor. They're getting exited as permanently housed in HMIS and they're coming the same day to show up here.
Oh, that's not
See,
right.
But that's something that the HLA needs to be, we need that data fixed, because that's just not, it's a disservice to the people there. I mean, and the other big thing, I think we need to develop a strategy in that data collection at the front door. You know, the question needs to be asked, is your intention on the street tonight to be housed here in Pinellas County? Is that your intent?
You gotta separate, yeah.
Because that's a very different strategy. And in the veteran world, we were 50% wanted to be housed and 50% did not want to be housed. And then the VA changed the standard that we had to document asking the question every 10 days. And then it took 50, 60 days of that intervention before we got them ready to be housed. And that's the type of strategy that helps. But that street work has to happen now, like not in September. We need to quantify what the actual problem is, and we need to make sure we've got the service transaction, so we know what we're talking about. Preferably with a VI SPDAT score attached to it. Because you can't say we'll put more into rapid rehousing if everyone you've got on the street is a 12.
We can't rapid rehouse everybody now, so we can't, yeah.
Well, I think, Daisy, it might be better to do it as a full group activity rather than a struggle with individual objectives and kind of, you know, as Michael said, look at the whole flow process. We can consider where low hanging fruit is maybe at first. But I think one thing I wanted to get back to was Michael made a statement about, and it ties in with our meeting with law enforcement, and the law enforcement meeting was about getting people off the street, groups of 6 or more. We don't want to see it. That's what they're going to target. And you you mentioned getting people off the street and telling them, you know, you shouldn't come here, we don't have services, or getting you back to where you came from. And that's okay for those who didn't come, who came here, but I think our numbers show that most are from Pinellas. So where we're going to send them, I don't know, you know, unless they have family up in Arkansas or
You
something.
gotta remember that you don't even have, I would propose that you don't even have 15% data collection at the front door right now. Numbers that you're seeing there don't reflect what's out on the
Yeah.
street. And you can't go back to that pit count because that
No,
was a
I
day,
agree.
that was a day back in.
January.
And so I have Ian here on the week of June 10th, and he has been traveling the world. And I don't know whether we will schedule, and I don't know that I have his schedule for that week here. But it would be really, really good to have maybe a facilitated dialogue all the way through the system flow. And let's just start with one cohort, let's just say single and individual male or individual female. And have a facilitated dialogue about what that flow looks like. What questions are we not asking that we should be asking? And then what type of strategies we could do it. And I could leverage him for a day that week of June 10th. She's already showing me, I've already got him.
So I think we have, 17th of June available for everybody who would want to.
I don't have the international consultant here on the 17th. I have the international 17th here, and we're paying him for to be here the week of the 10th. And if we could figure out a day on that day that we could get together and.
Okay.
Huh?
I think we have to capitalize on that opportunity. Not that we all don't know kind of where Ian comes from when he talks, if you don't know who he is. But if we're gonna focus on the law and making sure that the people that are in danger of going to jail when this law goes into effect, it's not the families, because when that question got asked at the law enforcement meeting that we had, there's no cop in this county that would ask the family and hell, mom and dad, you sit in the back. Well, Junior, you're gonna sit up front here with me and we're gonna take mom and dad to jail.
Good luck calling DCF.
That's not right. We were talking about the same population of people that we've been talking about since I got involved. In 2000, well, whatever, 10 and a half years ago. So I think we gotta figure out who we're gonna focus on. And we gotta figure out exit strategies once we get those people.
But I would say too, Lieutenant Hayes, I mean, I respect that for sure, but I think the shift is the potential, and Aaron said on October 1st, it'll happen, of cities being sued because we don't have shelters for families. And if they don't want to get sued or rectify it in 5 days, it means Chrissy Bond or somebody finds a hotel for them with whose money? You know, I mean, that, and for how long? And that was the question I asked Chief Slaughter. It's like, okay, as a taxpayer or whatever, and a former council member, I mean, I'm all for sheltering families, but we got to know where the money comes from and for how long, because we don't have homes to put them in. And so that's, while I trust all this discussion about adult males and females, but people who are in wheelchairs or families are the ones who are going to be the most sympathetic for a lawsuit. You know, if somebody says, I'll pay for them for 5 days, but somebody got to step up and find somewhere else for them. I mean, we don't have anywhere else for them.
And I also think if you ran an active shelter census for this week of the number of people that are currently in shelter over the age of 80, I think y'all are gonna be blown away.
Wow. Brought it on the last meeting, dealing with female over 60.
And
I'm worried
so
about
I think,
80.
yeah.
I have them in shelter over 80.
Yeah.
I just brought a 94-year-old in this week.
To get to that ask though, we would have to know, like a municipality would have to know. Like my ask to Joe, what is it gonna cost me to get 25 more beds there, right? It's $65,000 for a case manager plus an additional, like, how do you get to that ask of what it's gonna cost unless you know, like, do you need more case managers? Do you need more space? Like, what do you need? How do we get to that ask to funders or even figure out what that looks like if we don't know? So I think that has to be part of the conversation.
So the
What do we
matrix-
need?
Yeah, so that matrix is being worked on and we're gonna send it out, well, not today, but on Monday or Tuesday, because we got all of that information from all of the providers and we'll send it out.
From all of our shelters.
Right. all the shelters, yes.
But the solution is not more shelter space.
Right, no, I'm
No,
not,
no,
Not more shelter.
but it has to be to some extent, right? So we had to create we have to create capacity somewhere.
You gotta move them out of shelter to create
Right.
space.
Yeah,
But I mean,
get that.
you know,
Yes.
Without on, back on the street.
Creating concentration camps for homeless people, which is what the law was intended to do, is to create, that's a concentration. When you put someone someplace with no plan to get them out, and this is where my passion is, and I just got quoted in the National Catholic Register, and I'm afraid to read it because I blew up on the reporter. You can't put someone in a place without a viable option to get them out of there. That is warehousing human beings, and our world tried that in the 1940s in Germany, and it did not end well.
So I get that, but if there's an ask for dollars to be funding rapid rehousing, whatever that looks like, what would the ask from providers be? And I'm not saying that it has to be shelter. I just said that that's what we did with.
That's the
Joe.
first
But
part.
if the ask,
Gotta
right,
be Several parts after
where can
that.
they go? But definitely, how can they get out? And if that ask is for rapid rehousing, whatever that ask is, we have to know, because it's, quite frankly, there's only 2 municipalities funding in JWB, right? Funding, well, there's the county, there's the city, and JWB funding rapid rehousing.
Clearwater just brought some money on.
Water, right, but there's how many municipalities throughout the whole county, and everybody's got unhoused neighbors there, right? And so that's, in order to know what the ask is, in order to say, hey, we need money from everywhere, because every municipality can be sued, we have to know what the need is. So like, I hear you loud and clear, and we say the same thing, like the money needs to go to individuals, like rapid rehousing was designed for individuals, like I say that quite a bit. Our families, people are sympathetic to families, we made them a priority, however, in that making them a priority, we've lost prioritizing our individuals and moving them from shelter into rapid rehousing. I think I hear Lieutenant Hayes say 1 person out of Safe Harbor has been rapidly rehoused.
Well, in 2023.
Right. In 2023.
One main line, one VA.
Right. That can't, so nobody's moving out of
I got
there.
5,000 people that we saw.
Right, and so I'm just we're trying to figure out like
why they don't go there.
what's the, how to get out, right? What's the out, and then where can new people go in?
I think that the healthy conversation is we need to increase system capacity for this portion of the system. And we need to true up that data, because we can't keep discharging from shelter to permanent housing without a physical address, and they cannot show up to another shelter the same day or the next day. And that first shelter, there should be fines for that. That first shelter should be fined $20,000 per unit that they put into HMIS, and we'll donate that money somewhere, because we can't keep monkeying around with the data and then claiming that we got a discharge rate that is just untrue. It's just an untrue discharge rate.
Yeah.
Carol, you had a question.
Part of this, though, I agree with both of you for sure on all of it, but we only prioritize once they're, like we said earlier, once they're in shelter. And that's what's leaving our vulnerable population out on the street, for one thing, but then also if we do have limited capacity in our shelter, you know, I mean, I see. Make sure that we're prioritizing getting access to that. So I think that's very important. The other concern is we only have street outreach in Clarkson County. And so the only engagement, for example, like North County, is going to be law enforcement. So how do we address that issue, and how are those individuals connected to the system? How are they getting access to shelter, prioritized if there's no street outreach?
So we did just allocate, well, not we, the county just got us the money to hire 2 new street outreach workers to go out into the county. And so that cops with badges and guns and cars with scary back seats don't have to educate the public. It's gonna be street outreach workers saying, hey, look, this new law is coming up. Here's some information. Get in the car. You can go Safe Harbor with me right now. And the reason I'm using Safe Harbor is because it's the only you get in right now. We're gonna hit everywhere in between. I mean, the city of Lawrence, you guys have a great handle on things. Tremendous. From talking to your chief and Ryan, and you guys, the way you guys engage things as far as public sleeping and everything, you guys have a great handle on things, and you do a great job, Todd. And the city of St. Pete says, you know, you guys are kind of good, and you've got your street outreach mechanism, and and you don't want any help, but there's a few cities that do want our help, so we're gonna get out there and help them. And in addition to the areas, all of the other areas of the county that the sheriff's office is responsible for, and all the municipalities that we provide contract, law enforcement for. So we'll be in all those cities, hitting them, educating this population, not with law enforcement, but with street outreach.
Did we go back to that monthly street outreach meeting or bi-weekly street outreach meeting that got evaporated when staffing changed? Because we used to have a monthly.
There's a post-it note on my desk that says, make the street outreach meeting happen again.
I mean,
Well, I think the other entity that we have to look at, we're just saying homeless in general, which I understand the population, but then you get into DV clients, domestic violence clients, are a totally different game. Like I've been dealing with the DV folks in our police department this week with a couple families, but the other one's a chronic homeless. The folks that have lived out for 7, 8 years who don't want anything, and this is their natural habitat.
by definition, that's not chronic. You gotta stop using that word. That's not a chronic
Well,
homeless.
you'll have to look it up because it is chronic
You
homeless.
have to have had but when you do the VI spit out for them, they're not testing chronic because they don't have the documented disability to
I've
do
been doing
that.
this 23 years, and that's chronic homelessness because they're comfortable
are
living in a.
That's highly visible homelessness. Not chronic.
So,
That's HUD versus common sense.
exactly. Right.
HUD says versus what an individual that presents as being chronic.
Exactly. And we have different determinants on why they're
Yeah.
there compared to a lady who just been pushed out of her trailer park because she got behind on her lot rent and now she's outside.
Or rent got raised, yeah.
Right, exactly. I've been dealing with piles of that.
Yeah.
Margo. So those are two different variables, especially when the lawful part gets in, because the law is gonna go, we've been dealing with this guy for 7 years. They're not gonna have the patience for it. They're gonna be doing it. It's just gonna happen. Then you're gonna have the folks that are gonna have a huge heart for it, and it's not right, saying it all should be the same. But that's kind of the realism of what's gonna happen when this is enacted. It's gonna be some of that going on. It's not gonna be an equal playing field. It really isn't.
So kind of getting back to you, Michael, does June 10th work, or is he already booked that day?
Wednesday or the Friday is what Judith just showed me. I don't know what day of the week is that.
The 10th is a
Monday.
Monday,
Wednesday
so
or Friday?
if you wanted to stay in the Friday trend,
I mean, we don't have to,
Yeah.
whatever you have available.
Wednesday then probably is the best, which would be the 12th. So if you want anybody from municipalities. But Wednesday will.
So we can work on that
We
date.
can
with
do that.
you.
Yeah, we'll get together and we'll look at the calendars.
He's gonna need to be briefed.
Paying them, right? So you're paying them, right? Get his agenda when he gets here on Monday.
No, that ain't the way that works. Those
So-
outcomes are good.
So for that meeting then, what are the topics that we want to discuss to move things forward? When it comes down to like the system capacity, the entry points, looking at the VI SPDATs, working with the matrix as well, street outreach, I put also diversion conversations, what other items we want to put on
A
that?
data collection on at the front door, how that's gonna be put into HMIS, who's gonna be analyzing that in HMIS. There's some do's and don'ts in that interface, cause you're gonna get your first response to a gun and a badge is gonna be a no. So, I mean, he can really help with that. He didn't have a very good time with the staff from the police department at the city the one time we had him meet there, but I think times have changed now because of the law, that maybe there's more of an appetite for that social services versus the guns and bullets response,
What city are you talking about?
not yours. Helen remembers,
Not the county.
county, no,
Makes sense.
my city.
Everybody loves it.
Well, they just didn't want to be there, so that was that part, but maybe now we've got to try to figure out. The issue is we can't even talk about this back end of the system without that data on the front door. And the challenge is by labeling, even just thinking that time on the street alone is chronic. The back end of this, what you do with someone that's chronic requires a PSH capacity, not an RRH capacity. And we got to be careful to say we've got too many chronic on the street, because I want to tell you, you don't. You've got a lot of people that have been on the street a really long time for a whole variety of reasons, but they don't require a bully bed. And if we send them to Boley, it's gonna be a mistake because you've used up a Boley bed or a HEP bed in PSH that could have gone to somebody else, but they also are not gonna want to adhere to that high level of programming and that high level of healthcare need. So that's why we've got to be careful that we understand the definition of terms.
Well, and they won't, they're not documented, right, in our system anyway, so they're chronic based off of how long they've been on the street, but they don't have the chronicity documented in the system because they have to have that, right? So they're not allowing us to put them in HMIS.
Right.
And they don't have the documented disability as well, that they need to be considered HUD chronically. Yeah.
Now, I'll just share with you that when we first started, when we put on the first skedadding, that was a verb that was created here with Ian. We did a 90-day skedadding. Some of you were here and you remember that. The data result of that was shocking for us. So we realized at that point in time at the SVDP shelter, 45% of the people that were in that shelter had a score of 1, 2, or 3. They had no freaking business in our shelter. And at that point in time, I went to Cliff Smith and I went to the folks at the city and said, I need to be having a very different conversation with these people with a VI SPDAT score of 1 that is taking up a shelter bed. It's a very different conversation than someone with a VI SPDAT score of 7, 8, or 9. That conversation sounded like go home to your mother, put your big boy panties on and get your shit together, but you ain't taking up this bed anymore. And that's a huge concern is we need that data to know what we're dealing with, and we need it soon, by July 4th.
Can we start between now and, June 10th or whatever, 12th, whatever it's gonna be? And I apologize, but I'm gonna be in Washington DC that week, but I will be available if it's hybrid. Can we get somebody on staff, or I can volunteer, to call these shelters every day to get an accurate number and see if we can get a VI SPDAT number associated with?
You're not gonna get the VI SPDAT number,
No,
because trying to pull that data out of a shelter inventory list isn't possible. I've been asking for it since we started the VI SPDAT.
My concern with that is if there's not entry into shelter every day, it doesn't make a point
Right,
to have
that's right.
daily access. So if it's
Yeah.
once a week, that's what we're getting right now is the once a week.
how many do we have that only have, they don't have 5 days a week or 7 days a week entry into shelter?
It's only Pinellas.
The only one that doesn't. have
And they do twice, they can do twice, they're doing twice a week now, specific to the city, but I think Joe's up in that.
Yeah, we're open to any day, just it's a phone call away, but the way our system is set up, it's set up for 2 days a week, yeah.
So the capacity is
We do entries and exits in HMIS every day, every day.
yeah, they do it every time, so that it would be
Some
pretty
weeks today, they're
Right, but if
exited.
you can't get somebody in.
You could,
You know what
if
I'm
a phone-
saying?
yeah,
You
yeah.
wanna know that day before, that day you're trying to get someone in, I guess.
We just need to make sure we get, I mean, I am all about clean data. You gotta have the best data possible to make the best decisions. So, Michael, what data do you think we absolutely need to be that's realistic to make the best decisions?
There needs to be better data collected by street outreach. And where is that being parked in the system so that the interfaces are being tracked? There needs to be more street outreach. I think that's a big concern.
Well, we can't get that like right now. So if we want to get the cleanest data possible in 2 weeks, we have to, so you're saying work with the street outreach that we have right now.
Well, we gotta put a mechanism in place that captures it, and we've regressed in that. I think we've dramatically regressed in that in the last year. And we've got to figure out, are there resources that we could currently deploy today? Could I take 2 workers out of SSVF and put them in a meeting with Zach and a meeting with Laura and start to have a meeting that strategically canvasses the entire county to try to get it accurate? We almost need a pit count. The other thing that I think is what is the COC's appetite for mandating coordinated entry into shelter? And what does that look like? Because that is going to be that has to be in place by October 1. We're going to have coordinated entry into shelter. So you've got a centralized intake and a centralized referral system into shelter So that everyone is put on a shelter seeking list, just like they're put on a rapid rehousing list and a PSH list. You need a shelter seeking list, and this community is missing seeking shelter list.
I can tell you the sheriff's not gonna go for that. If,
Why not?
because we're 24/7, 365. If you need to get off the street, get off the street, go there. We're not putting you on a list.
Well,
That's silly.
so pulling, you guys can pull like that. The rest of us don't quite pull like.
No, I know. I'm just saying.
That centralized dashboard, and even if the flow within that dashboard is a mixture between push and pull. You know, we've got to get our hands on, we don't have that data. We do not know tonight how many people are on the street seeking shelter and can't get into shelter.
According to these, the PowerPoint slides, there's open beds almost everywhere. There's not a 100% next to the capacity.
That data has to be scrubbed because you've got to remove all those VA programs off that because our grant and per diem is only occupied at 66% because there's not a qualified vet tonight to put into the 33%. And those are not open to you to put someone in to that shelter. So we've got to scrub those specialty ones and pull them off of, they're just not available to the community. You have to be qualified at Bay Pines, you have to.
Got it.
They're just not open beds.
I think we need some sort of resource for our street outreach folks on how they get access to that. Cause if our folks out on the street don't know where the front door is, the folks on the street certainly aren't gonna find it on their own. So that's what I'm thinking about when I look at a lot of these that are lower, like, why are people going? Is it really high criteria or just like, no one knows to check there to see if it's open, available?
Well, and we have some street outreach, some communities like Treasure Island and Madeira Beach or whoever, there's a group of 2 or 3 little municipalities down there that have just hired, a specialist that's working with them.
Go for it, Church Rock.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think they enter into HMIS.
It's built on,
they
they
do.
do, the directions for living.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they have access.
And then the fire department does, don't they? Treasure Island? Yeah, Treasure Island Fire, because they're making.
But street outreach historically enters data very differently by teams. So that's probably still the case.
So not a uniform entry.
Street outreach has a different workflow, so they go on like a 30-day, trying to reach out to that client as often as they can within that 30 days. If they don't make contact with that client within that 30 days, they're encouraged to close that.
Yep. And that's what's encouraged to do. That's the flow.
Yeah.
But are all the teams doing that?
The teams that we are aware of in HMIS that are labeled street outreach are trained. They are
Trained to do that.
street outreach.
But the piece we're missing is the unhoused. What do they need? Where are they going? Why aren't they going? And really understanding that, going back to those like work groups, and street outreach can help us gather some of that information. But we can count people all day long and say, we've got this many beds for this many people, but on paper, they're already there. So why aren't they going?
Exactly.
That's what we're
What do
trying.
they need and what do they want? Because what they need and what they need is common sense what they need. But what they want, what they're willing to accept are two different things. And
Well,
Also
what they
mental
need-
health.
What they need might be, I'm in a wheelchair and I need a space where so that need has to be captured too. So we're trying to capture that too. What they need versus what they want.
what
Right, one thing we said, people with pets.
Yeah.
Pinellas Hope, only option. Okay, so if you can't do extreme heat, and you can't, and you're want a little bit more distance, or, and you've got a pet, you can't go to Pinellas Hope. There's other populations too, but that's an obvious one that people aren't separating from their pets, and we don't have pet-friendly shelters.
Also has a pet.
Yeah, we're the only ones with the kennel.
Grace House was gonna act for 30 beach shelter. And that was because people would not leave their abusers because they would leave their pet behind.
And they won't leave the woods because they won't leave their pet behind.
So that's a request to the county's animal services program to somehow expand capacity, that there's a homeless services room where the pets of the homeless services dogs are being kept safe while the homeless services people are being housed, because, I mean, and that's,
In the city of San Antonio,
San Antonio.
they have one right at Haven, right downtown, they have their own kennel. So each animal got its own kennel, because
Called before either Humane Society, I can't remember, but they'll hold on to them for a few days while they work things out. Not long.
Three to hospitalized or something like that, but it's not long-term.
Yeah, it's definitely not long.
And there's been grants in our community in the past that actually extended those. There's some for veterans because they're volunteer groups taking care of each other. But those shelters exist and there's models, like there's a big one in Gainesville that has a huge kennel connected to its shelter process.
But, and our system has a huge animal advocacy group, you know, they oftentimes come to the Board of County Commissioners when things are in discussion there, but outside of animal services, there's lots of other small Humane Society, Pet Pal Shelter, like if that really is a need, then I think that becomes an action item. So if we've identified that there's 50 individuals who are chronic or not chronic, and they're living in a park, sleeping overnight, they will be impacted by this law, and nowhere to go. Then we need to bring that group together and say, is there a way you can assist? Because that is an area that we need to focus on, and they still may not want to separate from their pet. And they still may say they're not doing it.
We bring in a whole different pot of funding, because you get people who don't particularly care about homelessness is something that they're gonna give money to.
Yes.
But they care about dogs, so they'll, you know, you make the need concrete and somebody will write the check.
Right, or the 94-year-old individual who finally was able to enter shelter. You know,
most of the time, it's only an emotion pet. It's not just a pet. You have to have a designation to go. So most of the time, what I'm doing during the week is saying, let's get you to a doctor, get a note. Once you have that note, it says it's a social emotional dog. It helps you with your anxiety, and then I can get them into the house. So it takes some legwork. Can do.
The animal shelter is in storage. It's huge, like people are not gonna go to shelter because they don't wanna leave their stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a conversation.
So what about the Humane Society? I could reach out to them and see if they are willing to assist us throughout that process.
I think the part is we're still in hypothetical, so of the 350 census, what item could change that would impact them accessing shelter? And we're still at 50, but that's the part I think we're missing, is we have an idea.
Lieutenant Hayes, on that census of 350 that we've got, is that a specific area in the county, or was that the county as a whole, or was it
That is
a
all,
small, a small population that we're looking at?
so that was all of the law enforcement agencies that were willing to provide the data within their cities, and then all of the places that Pinellas County Sheriff's deputies, community policing deputies went and took a look at. There are plenty, I'm looking at I looked at the list created, and I know there's other pockets of places and stuff, so I know the number flexes, but if we start with that 350.
That's a starting point, but we need a better number, I think, to Michael's thing. What is that population? What is that target we're looking at? 500, 1,000, 350?
We gotta get the system to count that in place before October, so that you know what you're dealing with once October rolls.
So data is one thing, but I know I guess I'm into that action part of those different. But I mean, what if we just set a goal for ourselves to pass out, see how many people we can get off the street within the next 90 days or something? And like, what do we need to do that? Like, what would be those steps today that we could be taking? Whether they're little tiny ones or bigger ones. I mean, funding's great, but we also, we've got budget cycles and this, that. It's not like something happens overnight, but how can we use, like, I love leveraging. We do have a huge pet fan who they came to us too. And so, the group you're talking about, get them involved. How do we get our faith-based organizations to say, we're trying to get people off the street and or housed within 90 days. We're trying to get at least this many people. How can our faith-based groups help to get them housed or sheltered in that time? Like, make it urgent, have a sense of urgency, I guess, and have a measurable outcome and actually see the successes of getting out. I don't know what those would look like, but how do we do that?
Getting them into shelter is probably the easiest part compared to getting them housed. So like, we're talking a lot about getting people into shelter, the utilization, the capacity, how can we make that easier. That's great. But I'm picturing, what if I'm, at capacity every day completely and. we're-
That's the warehousing that Michael's.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't keep them forever, so I'm gonna be saying your time is up. You fall in that category where I don't know what we can do for you. And so your time is up. So I'm just turning them back out into the street.
That's what Ian's gonna say when he comes next month, right? It's like, it's
I'm
not.
gonna ask how many in shelter actually have a housing stability plan? They're actively working. How is that housing stability plan incentivized? Who's monitoring those housing stability plans? How many of them are in place? That was the shift to that was the huge shift to our discharge rates at St. Vincent's is we went in and we did what he told us to do. And that's why we're having the success that we're having, but we're smaller. I mean, we're not 300, 400. We really started to promote self-resolve because there's this energy within the system that somehow someone at either a city or a county has to write a check in order to get this to happen. But we forget that the largest number is in the ability to self-resolve and how can we get creative with them to help them figure out how to self-resolve. And a large number of our folks self-resolve with guidance. They can't think of it on their own. But that progressive engagement allows that guidance and we can get them to self-resolve.
I don't know how we self-resolve if someone's making $914 a month, and that's all they're gonna be getting.
Yeah.
And then there's no family, there's nothing, and.
But I think if you heard,
Family in your shelter.
but I think if you heard of that, but where's the housing authority in this discussion?
We work with all our housing authorities.
Is the housing authority gone back to doing the lottery or are they still doing the rollover vouchers targeting specific homeless? And I'm gonna tell you that they've gone back to too much of the lottery. So this is all tied together. I think anyone over the age of 80 that's appearing in shelter should instantly get a housing choice voucher. And that's going to help solve that placement with them because you're right. They're only going to get the 900 and at 85 years old, you're not going to get them a job. You're not going to get that income up. We got to solve that problem.
Put that as an action item is to.
Anyone over 80 get a voucher.
Isn't that already a priority in the,
It's a priority.
isn't that already a mandated priority in something?
Housing authority has that priority.
Aging.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
that's already, it's already a thing.
It is.
But I thought the wait list is like 2 years.
They used to have a senior
have a
list that
voucher,
was
but
smaller, and then I think when they were redoing the village, they had to put all their.
When Debbie Johnson was there, she took half those rollover vouchers and she gave them to veterans, and that's what allowed us to get that veteran number down from 2,800 to 1,400. God rest her soul. But that woman was a saint and she worked behind the scenes with the Pinellas County Board. And we got almost 1,500 vouchers that would have gone to the lottery that we were able to attach them to veterans and then some of them. And we were able to, the utilization of the HUD VASH vouchers in our community is at a crisis low. And we're trying to facilitate a dialogue between the housing authority and the med center, neither of whom are represented in this room today. But there's a huge issue with the underutilization of those vouchers. And VASH just released, the housing authority has an active RFP on the roll right now in the Federal Register to increase vouchers. And we got to make sure that Pinellas and St. Pete Housing Authority are going after those vouchers. And I'm going to tell you, on their own volition, they're not going to do it. They're going to have to be forced to do it by community outcry to go after those vouchers.
I think part of the issue they're running into too is people have vouchers that can't find a place still to,
That was all done.
I know we've been trying to find more and more like the housing navigation services over the years to try and help connect and build that, but that the landlord contact, I think for a community is huge. Community meeting in Pinellas County is a big component. I think it was like Nashville or so on that created like a landlord consortium basically, and they were sharing incentives for landlords to be part of it. And it really helped open up the number of housing units they were making available to, very background.
Well, and I think Daisy too, I think, speaking of the exit ramp, which we've talked, for as long as I've been here, there's no exit. We don't have enough capacity for the exit ramp, but I think we should invite, and I talked to Whit Blanton, who is the CEO or chair of Forward Pinellas, our municipal planning organization that's in charge of the Pinellas County Housing Compact that a number of municipalities have signed on to, not all of them. I think it's about 5 or 6, But, you know, he's tasked, their agency is tasked with fulfilling this Pinellas County Housing Compact, which is everyone has a right to housing in the county, and how are we going to get there? It's really lofty. There's no measurable goals. It's all just a bunch of fluff. But it was signed and it's out there, and they need to be part of, you know, this exit strategy discussion. You know, what are you guys doing? So.
I'm on that committee too. There is an action plan that's been adopted. Most of the partners have now adopted that. And they actually just are working on creating a whole big assessment of every land development regulation and comprehensive plan throughout the county to look at barriers, or like how many affordable housing incentives are there now, and make recommendations for ways to improve that. So they're diving into making.
Good. Even landlord incentives, you know, not just building, because we don't have a lot of space for building, but making what housing we have now more affordable for.
Well, we won't have it up by October 1, but we just broke ground on 75 units on Fourth Avenue North. The bulldozers are there, they've begun the destruction, and those 75 units, 100% of those 75 units are dedicated to formerly homeless. So we'll have 75 units, Florida Housing Finance funded, on the edge of downtown St. Pete for that. We need more of that.
Was that a vacant land or repurposed something, or what?
It was where the tents were slashed.
So as, it's like 4 o'clock-ish, right? So what are,
How do we wrap up?
what are we doing here? What,
One thing I'd like to add is at the kitchen in Clearwater, at least half of the people who come to the kitchen are senior citizens. And we're not gonna get them working. They bring in Social Security, which is too low to afford to live somewhere. But they use that money to stay in a hotel until it's a profit each month, and then they come back to the street. They're not gonna go to the safe harbor. They're just not gonna do it. And they're not gonna go and attend. If there was permanent supportive housing available to them, they would take it in a second. And I know they'd be good residents because they go back to the same hotels every month who welcome them every month. So it tells me they do want to be housed. And they don't mind investing in that. They just don't make it up.
wouldn't it be great to have, this is where my dream of having congregations adopt. Couldn't a congregation adopt and help supplement? Of course, you don't want them living in a hotel. You know, so they're not out on the street, so they're not like in a hotel for 18 days and then out on the street for 12 or whatever. But, you know, something that would help with that.
But even an all call out to the faith-based groups, we've found this many seniors, we're looking for rooms for rent.
Yeah.
In people's
Yeah.
homes or
Now let's
something
hope
like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was looking for, she's looking for landlords, but she's also looking for more people as well. She was at this meeting for seniors. I sent her one of the asks that we had, that she had was a list of, like, how could she get the information out? So I sent her our City of St. Pete, like, neighborhood association list so that they can put the information out in their flyers. She can connect with them that way. I'm saying Kathy, is that right? Kathy. So that might be a way to connect as well.
And then
Last time I talked to her,
it's replicating that because it is very limited.
Yes, yes. It's limited based because of the capacity that, right, it's limited because she doesn't have enough people. in her home, Right.
So you can't pass out flyer out to 500 people
Right.
because there's three opening. I know.
Well, no, you have to pass out the flyer to 500 homeowners.
Right.
exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
And she said the capacity to match them appropriately, the staffing or volunteers to help do that critical matching.
They're very lean.
That's the home care, right? Yeah, and I did connect our landlord engagement person at HLA with her so that they can start looking at other possible like renters and other landlords as well. So I made that connection too.
I wonder too if that could be part of the workflow in, you know, we tried to do a deep dive with the data on our prevention programs, and you talk about data that's difficult. It's But I wonder if that could be part of the workflow, the Pinellas home share kind of thing. You'd need to scale up per capacity, but if you've got homeowners that are struggling with bills, if you can add some incentives and then say, what would it take to put another person in your house? And then have, have some Habitat or some other volunteer group come and do some simple modifications that would make it easier to put a person in a house. I think, there's some concrete barriers that are keeping people from doing that. And I think that's a logical place, but how do you connect the different systems of care that interact with that? We already don't do enough to prevent, but if you could give somebody 2 month subsidy, give them a little assistance and then put somebody in their house and take $300 off their rent or mortgage.
One of the other things I talked to her about was the renters, right? So we look a lot at homeowners, but, two people living in shelter already, both are 70-year-olds. Maybe they can home share together and rent, right? They're in shelter because they couldn't afford their rent, but how do we connect them together? So we talked a lot about that. I know that's not, she does that, but that's not her focus. But I said, a lot of people are renting. Maybe I can't afford $2,100 a month, but a 3-bedroom. I mean, I use my kids as an example. They're in a 3-bedroom in Orlando. Rent is $2,300 a month. They split it, and it works. Right. When they don't like each other, but it works. But that's the thought. If they're in shelter somewhere together, they've made friends, they've become somewhat of a family, so to speak. They're sleeping in the same space already. If we can put them together, so I have people from dialysis that they go to dialysis together, and we just were able to house them together. It just worked. So
You see a lot of that in the north. I worked in different cities, Cleveland, for example, because there's basements. You can separate and still have your separate housing, but you can't make that a multi.
Right.
Here, it's a little bit more difficult. Like you say, you need that funding to maybe adapt the house so you could do it and be more effective, so everybody has their own space.
And you need to build.
You gotta put the right people together.
That's what she said. That's
Yeah,
the hardest.
that's the hard part. We've had some success. That's been really good to see, but you get homeless people that have a lot of baggage, and they're gonna.
But our new seniors though, that are newly, those are the ones that I would be like trying to, hey, let's have this conversation. What does that look like?
Yeah, you gotta think of everything.
Well, so Karen, the county can't just write a check for Pinellas County Home Share and help her get more staffing. I mean,
No.
how are we gonna help her out right away? I mean,
I think we look elsewhere just besides the county. I think we have to get organized on our ask. I mean, there's a lot of things we've talked about here. I don't know that we're organized on our ask. So the first thing is whatever the number is of those that are sleeping in camps. So we can't solve everything. This law is targeting those that are sleeping overnight. We've always had this work to do and to be done. Those that are going to be impacted by this law. So if it's the 348 that all the law enforcement agencies saw, we have to figure that out. What is the barrier? Is it animals? Is it seniors? What is it? We don't know that.
Right.
And right now we're showing capacity.
I know it, which is crazy. I
think we all knew we had capacity. Shelter has been offered to these individuals.
I know, but April shouts out, we've got 80 to 140 families on the wait list
And
for family shelter.
I'm very sympathetic to families, but if families are sleeping in parks,
Yeah, that's.
we have to talk about this law. Time is ticking for this law. What I heard at the meeting, and it wasn't my meeting, but every municipality law enforcement agency, and there was a ton at that meeting, said that they would figure the families out, but they're not seeing families sleeping in parks. It's individuals that are sleeping in parks, so we have to figure that out. So I think action item is if we have pockets of outreach, those teams need to meet because they have the intel. They know who we're working with. They've had the conversation. They know what they are. You have to start there. And I know you weren't in position, but I asked your predecessor every month to pull an outreach meeting together with everyone that's performing that, because it wasn't just the county that was funding it. There's multiple funders of that service. So they have the knowledge. The path teams have the knowledge, that's who we need to get in a room and figure out this 348. What are our next steps? How many of them are seniors? How many of them have income? We have to figure that stuff out before we do a press release. Because I think right now, it's, what are we press releasing?
I know, I don't want to
Capacity.
do that with those numbers.
That's,
It shows that we
I
have
can-
capacity
Exactly.
and to push the shelters to
Exactly.
fix that, because I do know that on any given night that I call St. Vincent de Paul, they will create capacity for me in the courtyard, which is not true capacity, but there's not capacity inside the shelter. So it's also getting people to update their data timely as well. And it's no knock to any shelter, because I would imagine that it is very hard to keep that updated. But if we don't have those true numbers, then it looks like we have capacity and then we don't have an issue.
What do you want to say?
Has anyone asked the lived experience committee what barriers to shelter? I mean, like, I agree with the idea that we should survey and census the people who are actively in that situation now, but just like from a broad strokes perspective, people who have experienced it, did you go into shelter? Or what got you into shelter even? Are the types of questions we need to be asking.
Those were some of the questions or issues discussed during the initial meetings, and they have been brought up in subsequent meetings. But if there are specific questions that this group would like us to survey the lived experience members, that is something that we can definitely do. Both of our co-chairs for that group are in this room right now, so that's something that we could do, I'm sure.
Well, why don't you, could you compose an email to the whole membership of the task force and ask what questions we might suggest of the lived experience committee to ask about? And maybe even share those questions with street outreach so that we can understand from them what they might be hearing from people who don't want to go into the shelter.
You gotta be specific to shelters too,
Yeah.
because we are very specific, like, why won't you go to St. Vincent de Paul?
Right,
Why won't you go to Salvation
exactly.
Army? Why won't you go, every single shelter we ask?
Right.
Why, what is the barrier
Yeah.
to you go into,
Yeah.
into this interim housing situation?
And it sounds like you already have a foundation of that, because you've been collecting them for the past couple months.
Not that long, but
Oh.
yeah. I'd have to check April's stuff, but yes.
Yeah, that would be, not the data necessarily, but the
Right.
questions.
Right.
Yes.
Chrissy knows, I mean, people who. Yeah.
Is it feasible for outreach folks to be asking these questions and sharing that data?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If there's an outreach meeting that happens, I mean, it's feasible to share with anyone, but definitely they need to all be in the same room together, having the same conversation. That's the only way information is gonna get shared. I mean, I'm sure that Todd and April and everyone that he works with, the street outreach, have conversations, but they're not all in one space having that conversation. He might have never talked to the rest of our path officers, but he probably talked to Filipponi several times, but we've got 6 on the street.
I guess part of the reason I'm asking is because it seemed like it took law enforcement to actually be able to come up with that 348 number. So it's do y'all have bandwidth to talk to those 348 people? And honest answer, right?
Find them and talk to them. Yeah.
Well, it's, that number was on, I'm assuming, I wasn't at that meeting, but I'm guessing that was on them driving through certain areas. I will tell you the places, some of the places that I see on the list are actually, I've driven them myself. It's not public property, right? And so I cannot enforce what's on private property, what may look like public property to law enforcement, but it's not, it's private property. And so some of those numbers are coming from that. Some of them might be coming from PSTA, which is not, it's a PSTA bus stop. I can't enforce that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find ways to close the loop because.
And also they didn't go and actually talk to the clients and
it doesn't
did a
seem like they're
survey.
willing to,
It was
or
more of
invest people.
on site, what driving by, what it looks like, but it
Right.
wasn't outreach going there and surveying and having a conversation. So
it was only at night
it was only at nighttime.
for the law.
Well,
They're not looking at who's in parks during the day.
Right.
because They're not out of compliance with the law. It's-
well, at night was after 6 PM, right?
Well, they did the dusk till dawn after they did the drive-through.
Okay.
So what they collectively agreed to was dusk till dawn was gonna be considered overnight for sleeping.
For us, it don't.
Unless your park has.
So
specific-
that's what my ask on what the message should be to everyone. I know that's what what the conversation was and what was kind of agreed to. However, our legal team has said, you know, we've got a park open till 11. We can't make people leave. The park is open until 11.
I think if the outreach workers, when they get together at their meeting, it's gonna happen. And come up with one question that they can ask as they're educating, such as, what do you need when this goes into effect to choose something other than going to jail?
Yeah, that's a great.
Here's where I was going to suggest that HMIS put something in their assessment to capture, if a street outreach worker does touch base with somebody, ask them if they're willing to go into a shelter. If they say no, we can ask and have a pick list, but we could create the pick list based on what you all think would be a barrier. I'm thinking substance abuse issues that they may have that won't be allowed in a shelter. But I know that Lieutenant Hayes, the people that are on his list are probably the people that are in the encampments where street outreach isn't gonna be able to go.
Our street outreach goes. I mean, that's what street outreach is for. Yeah, our street outreach goes. I don't know, do you go?
I got my own radio on by myself.
Yeah, street outreach.
Yeah.
I still would pull them together before
Yeah.
we add another data element.
Right.
They already may know this. I think we have to pull them together and they're working with them and then talk about the data collection. For that piece.
Even a Zoom meeting or something that's.
Yeah, we'll make it happen. Well, if we even do a Zoom or a hybrid or, yeah, we'll get that going.
It needs to be in person. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just saying, I didn't be reading thought, but I just. Our PD, I mean, so for us, street outreach is PATH in April. That is our street outreach. You're not gonna get much from our six officers on a Zoom meeting because everybody else is, I think, to me, they seem to have worked in person.
It's assuming they're all attached to a police officer though, cause some.
Everybody isn't, but.
Ours is attached to the police department.
Or they have the ability to be attached to. What I'm saying is that PATH is a part of our street outreach. So what they are seeing, what people are telling them is just as important as our social worker and what she's hearing.
That's why I'm on the lived experience committee. We meet every month. Anywhere from 10 to 20 people who are homeless. We go over a variety of issues. And this is gonna be key issues. Yes, we can ask them, what do you want? And I can guarantee you, most of them will say, we need money for housing. There's no money for housing for something like that. You have availability, you have, utilization rates. And the problem is some people, like was mentioned, don't wanna go to the shelter. And the problem with I have a PSCO, ECSO, is that like in a situation where it's technically private property and near public property, and they won't care. They will just say, hey, I saw you here last night, it's too late, like, go to jail. Guess what? Now you can't get a house, now you can't get a rental, you've been to jail, not convicted. You don't have it, if you had a job, you won't anymore. And any savings you had goes to fines. So it becomes a vicious cycle. That's what will happen with people on the street. I think we're missing a little bit of that. And ultimately, people with that lived experience, I've lived in my car before, and I've slept in Walmarts. If I'm gonna go, one of my things I'm gonna do is see what kind of Walmart policy is and see what stores will allow it. I know my store occasionally has people overnight. And the emphasis on the word occasional. So that's not a permanent solution. Parking is not a permanent solution, nor should it be. But if you want to get people off the street, they're already in their car. And maybe parked in a parking lot somewhere. It's on public property. I think the camping or anti-camping is strictly for people who literally don't have a roof over their heads and includes a car. But still, the point being is, people who are on the street are going to be affected disproportionately for what we're discussing today in terms of action. And what those people, including I almost was homeless myself recently. And my renewal didn't go through, cause I couldn't afford the rent. So what are we gonna do? What I would have needed is money. Give me a decent job. Give me a place that I can have mail. Boom. And, and we still need to find a place that doesn't require 3 times, rent just to move in. Even permanent supporting housing, they still require deposits, security deposits. Usually for the last month's rent.
Yeah. But we have AFAB lift, like we have some ability here. We have funding in those areas for that to happen if you meet certain criteria, but the majority of people meet that criteria, I think.
The majority of our AFAP funding this year went through Lyft. So 63% of our $1 million went to Lyft, and that is moving people from shelter to housing.
Daisy, how are we doing with time?
4:20.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at it, Joe.
We wanna,
Joe's team does a really good job using Lyft, but that's great.
But yeah, it's great, but it is also about 3 times the rent, you know, the lift is great. But a lot of these landlords, it's like, you know, even if they have a voucher or they have security deposit, all that stuff, but they're still saying you need to.
all right, so I guess, our next action plan is, we'll start looking at outreach meetings. Making sure we have up to date, policy members, look at serving our lived experience committee, on those questions. And also try to get a date, of June the 10th with Ian and look at the system as a whole and see what we can move forward with. So I had, put on the calendar for June 17th, but that will change. If everybody can't attend, that's, you know, we'll record it again and make sure that for that week of June the 10th, we'll have people attend to discuss.
Can we also add like one message, like what is the message?
Yes.
We're telling people here, and to update the flyer.
And we'll update the flyer, we'll send it out to the group so you can, you know, communicate via email, so we don't have to wait for another meeting to get that done. So we'll adjust that, we'll send it out and we'll do it virtually.
Can we start playing around with the message virtually as well? And I'm pushing that just because we are educating people, but we're not all educating people the same way.
Right.
And so
We'll
giving
send out-
bad information is going to make this just as bad for everyone trying to get people into wherever they're gonna go. Right, and so people are thinking that, oh, the city is going to be required, right? Quite frankly, it says that we need to build something up. We need to create a space for them to go, and in that space needs to be certain elements. And so if that's what they're thinking versus, no, but wait, we have space available and here's where you can go. We're not gonna build this space.
Right.
This is where you can go. So I think we haven't figured out what we're doing yet, but we need to figure out what that universal message is going to be.
Okay, and we could do that via emails, we don't have to gather together to get that done.
Recognizing that if you send it to a municipality, it's public record, right? And so, I don't know how that works, you know, the conversation outside of any municipality, it's public record. Within any municipality, it's public record then, so.
And we want to try to put a date of like by the end of next week to be firm on a message. Wednesday? Yesterday?
It's Friday, so.
Yeah, I know, but same thing, you know, by the end of next week, people should weigh in and we should have a pretty polished, uniform message for right now is what we're working on and focusing on.
Yeah. I think that message was going quite kind of.
I'm talking about the message that we're gonna communicate to people in our municipalities or our events or groups, you know.
So I'm the flyer.
Yeah,
We're talking about the flyer.
I'm looking for the message that we're telling our unhoused neighbors.
Right.
What are we all telling them? Because people are saying dusk to dawn, which I know that was, But then I have our unhoused neighbors who are telling me that they are being told to leave right now, like you can't
Yeah,
be there
that was
right
part
now,
of it.
right? In certain areas. But we're not saying that right now. We're saying, hey, let me help you get into interim housing so that when this does go, October 1 happens, you're already safe, you're in a safe space, those kinds of things. So that's kind of how we're.
Well, and as Amy probably told you, she was in that, I mean, they want to start.
People are getting arrested, yeah, so I mean, you're going to be arrested, but we need to all be saying the same thing, like, not optional.
Right, we have to.
And what the sheriff answered was, when I asked in that meeting, is they're enforcing this effective August 1st based on laws, ordinances that are on the book right now. So it's just stepping up enforcement, because this one doesn't go into effect till October 1st.
Are they gonna enforce that as a result of a complaint or just because they see something?
They want to get it nipped in the bud. They want it.
So they're gonna do it, they're taking the initiative, they see it, they don't have a complaint, they
Yeah.
just see it
Well,
personally.
I don't know. That wasn't asked. I mean,
I think, and I've been in a few of those, and I don't want to speak for the sheriff, but it was educating them that Safe Harbor is open and available. So any messaging, any flyers, that's what it says, that this law is going into effect October 1st. Safe Harbor is available, move to Safe Harbor. That is the message. So the enforcement piece is really going to be if someone is like, absolutely not, I'm not going, and they're creating an issue, and there are more than a few in that area. Like that really was the sheriff's message. I have not heard that he's going to arrest, he doesn't want to do that. He wants them to move to Safe Harbor.
And
he's
they would
talked
arrest them
about-
if they refuse.
If they refuse, that's where that's what the law says.
right now.
Right, but there are ordinances in every single municipality that basically say the same thing, that you cannot sleep, you cannot have evidence of sleeping.
But not in ours, like our sleep crime ordinance says that you can't do it during the day. So.
And see there,
Yeah, you're gonna.
that's a great.
That's why
That's
I'm asking for the message.
It's hard, because in my mind, if I interact with an unhoused person, I'm gonna say, the new law is only for people overnight sleeping, not in city of St. Peter.
Nope, but don't say that.
So don't say that.
Don't say that, right? And so that's why I'm asking for a universal message. Because we are not saying that. We are saying, hey, this law is going into effect. We are not talking about our sleep, lie, recline ordinance at all. We are saying this law is here. This is what's going to happen. Let me help you get into interim housing now. So, but that's why I'm asking for a universal message, because for so long it's based off municipality, where if we're all saying the same thing, now everybody's hearing the same thing, and you got to do it this way. No matter whether, because we get people that call, oh, I'm from St. Pete because of this reason, or I'm from wherever because of this reason, right? But if we're all saying the same thing, it doesn't matter where you're from. If you're here in our county, this is what you're hearing.
And the Clearwater Police Street Outreach starts the morning at the kitchen, and we have everybody in HMIS. But then they're out and about all day dealing with calls from complaints of people on private property and stuff like that. But they end the day with the evening feedings. And those organizations do not participate in HMIS at all. So I do think it's really important for the street outreach partners to get together and share that information, because they see a lot that we may not ever see in HMIS.
And then the last about the flyer and communicating the same message. So again, to be proactive, are we, when we say this law is going to go into effect October 1st, we're still waiting for the Supreme Court decision. I mean, does that negate all of our, verbal communication or flyers? We get things printed up and ready to go to be proactive, and then something comes down at the end of June. You don't want to cause a lot of confusion, anxiety. 'Cause I don't know if everything gets put on hold with this bill.
I don't think it matters for us. We are still having that conversation, no matter what. I mean, it's work that needs to be done anyway, so we're not. We aren't gonna
It's gotta be
change
done.
that, but we're still gonna have that conversation.
Well, and as the sheriff said, these laws are on the books right now, and they are choosing to enforce them right now, or August 1st or whatever. So easing into it.
But I mean, there's, in the city of Largo, for example, we had a call the other day, somebody was sleeping in the park, right? So we go over, what you don't understand, there's residual meaning of those touches. because that person OD'd. We had about 3 minutes. We thought we were going to somebody sleeping, so we're just gonna, hey, can we give you some services, move them on? No, they had about 3 minutes left before the two shots of Narcan and the EMS got there. So there's other parts that, like, everybody's seeing this is criminal. I'm sorry, I see some benefit. There's a benefit to being able to engage. There's get them services, convince them in services, get those touches in there, because it might take 10 touches to get them where I need them to go. And we could be saving lives with the opiate act. There's so many other parts that people aren't seeing. There's roundabout ways that this can also be used as a tool to get people to support and to where they need to go, and a little bit of a push. We all need a push sometimes, and I'm not saying I'm not strong arming anybody, but sometimes some people need that. And we saved a life just because we went and checked on somebody sleeping in the park.
We've had that, or y'all have too, where they may not be able to see beyond where they're at, right? You know, and so those 3 steps along the way, it's too overwhelming. Hugely, but.
Well, thank you,
Well,
everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Yep. Was a good meeting. Thank you, Daisy. Appreciate it. We'll look forward to the next one.
I forgot.
See you, Joe. Plan kicking off next month.
Well,
We have plenty of data and our comp plan.
This is.